I had my mic muted this whole time. Awesome. Awesome. Okay, well, let's just back up a little bit. We got Alice falling down the rabbit hole. I don't know how that happened. I don't remember muting my mic. That's awful. But I'm Michael, aka Hands and Feet from hehasanswers.com, and we are looking at a series called Down the Rabbit Hole, the dropping truth bombs and the battle of the mind, and the reality that very powerful, wealthy, and influential people who basically control this world do not have our best interests at heart, and they are steering our nation, Canada, as well as our whole society and the whole world in total on an agenda to an end that won't be good for us. And so we have to help wake people up. So share this with people. I can't believe I was muted. That is so disappointing. I had so many more people viewing, and here we are. Yeah. But so we started off just right. So episodes 1 through 3 looked at the reality that there are actual pedophile networks. Okay. So we were unveiling the reality that these very powerful, influential people indulge in underage child sex for some weird reason. Maybe we'll get into that later on. Actually, we definitely will later on in the series. But they do that, and then governments cover it up and protect them. We saw in Belgium clear evidence of sex rings involving young children. It was disgusting, as young as like 8 years old. And the government and the police, the federal police there, covering it all up so it could keep going. And then we saw with Jeffrey Epstein also sourced out hundreds, probably thousands of underage girls for friends. And we talked a little bit about Nexium. And then finally, part 3, we looked at Alfred Kinsey, who was funded by the Rockefellers, and he was a quote-unquote scientist and sexologist who was used to bring in debauchery and depravity in society. We're all conditioned to believe that he helped us, release ourselves from unnecessary taboos and sexual stigma. But no, friends. There was an agenda, and they wanted to normalize pedophilia as well. And so the big question is, well, what is it with pedophilia? What is it with the depravity, sexual depravity, that they're, that's such a big deal for them? Why are they doing this? So tonight we're going to actually look at the reason for it and the kind of the means to achieve it, and the some of the ways they're doing it, and we're going to be looking at communism. But first, I know communism. But first, I just wanted to show this picture. Here's Alice in Wonderland. You can see Alice falling down the rabbit hole after she goes to, she's following the rabbit, takes a peek inside and loses her balance and tumbles down head over heels, which is very different to I'm trying to find, here, hold on a second. So when you compare the other picture, this picture, to this picture for our cover, yes, definitely, obviously, the animation is different. But aside from that, here's the rabbit hole. Here's all the stuff falling down. What's the difference? Well, this character, who represents me, it's an interesting backstory we won't get into. He's not falling. He's actually rappelling down safely and under control, and he's tethered off to the rock of truth. A lot of people, when they start looking at rabbit hole, like stuff down the rabbit hole, friends, they get overwhelmed and it drives them loony. And I'm so thankful that I don't have that problem. I can look at this, I can assess it, and then step back, because I'm tethered off. I'm tethered off. I don't think we talked about this yet, did we? So, here's Peter Nygard. Okay, he's Canada's own version of Jeffrey Epstein. This Vanity Fair. Vanity Fair is not a wonderful source, by the way, but I've already seen a whole bunch of stuff about this guy, and he was involved in, he was a big sex addict. Peter Nygard is the latest multimillionaire with a gated island estate. Yes, he also owns an island, to whom things seem to have caught up. The Canadian fashion executive said he would step down as chairman of Nygard International on Tuesday after becoming the target of the most high-profile sex trafficking probe since Jeffrey Epstein. Canadian. And he's got a lot of weird ideas too. Like wanting to have a whole bunch of, I think he wanted to have a whole bunch of surrogate mothers so he could have a bunch of babies, just like Jeffrey Epstein. So we're going to be talking about, I hope I didn't miss anything. We're going to be talking about communism. And a lot of people go, well, who cares? Communism, like no one wants communism. But Vladimir Lenin, as you're probably aware, kind of took over the reins from Karl Marx. Karl Marx is the guy that created Marxism, although some people say he stole these ideas. I doubt it. I mean, maybe he did. But he is not a nice man. He did not care about the people. It was not about equality and freedom and sharing and whatnot. It was about control. And you're going to see that's what this all is about. It's about controlling us. And it is freaky. So Vladimir Lenin, the goal of socialism is communism. And in honesty, I've never myself been able, and I looked for like half a day once, I've never been able to find the original source, so this may be falsely attributed, but the reality is, it is a truism, friends. The problem is, people say socialism is this wonderful system where everyone shares and everyone's equal and everyone has the same stuff and everyone has, availability of education and health care. Oh, it's so wonderful. But if you've had a sibling, especially several siblings or even cousins that you were around a lot growing up, you know how hard it is to share. In fact, as charitable as we like to pretend we are today as adults, as nice as we think we are in our donations, we're not terribly good at sharing. I don't know very many people that give all of their wealth away because they know that there's orphanages in Africa and India where kids are barely, getting by with more than a bowl of rice and an egg, maybe some chicken each day, So we really can't kid ourselves. And so what happens with socialism is very, very, very quickly, the people that helped push it together and are now leading it very quickly, they start propping themselves up, taking care of themselves off of the wealth of those below them as they raise the taxes, and then they pick and choose their friends, and all these people join into the bureaucracy, and those people also get taken care of, and then, at the very bottom is everybody else. And there's this massive disparity between really wealthy people and really poor people. And average wages, go right down the toilet. You can look at countries that have come out of communism and what it's been like for them. You can look at China, it's definitely a communist country. People like to look at Sweden and say, "Oh no, Sweden is a socialist country," and it's such a wonderful example. And so we can look at Sweden. Sorry, Bernie Bros, but Nordic countries are not socialist. That's the reality, friends. Sure, they might have healthcare that's socialized to some degree or whatever, but they're not truly socialist countries. And what you really also have to understand is places like Sweden, even though apparently they're all about free speech and everything, the actuality is the PC culture there is super strong. You can't say a lot of things and get away with it, and it's like that all over the place, and it's getting worse. So we're going to be looking at communism, and there's a book that came out. I'll just read this to you. The Naked Communist, 45 Goals to Destroy the United States of America. Now, America is the goal, friends, because it is like the bastion of freedom and strength in the West, okay? You might hate the United States, super powerful, and it's super free, and their constitution was brilliantly written to keep them free, but the socialists, the people in power, the people that want control of the world want to topple the United States in order to get them out of the way so that every other peon country, like, well, let's face it, you look at NATO, I intend at some point to just pull up a graph to show what the spending for NATO is in comparison. And the United States is like basically holds everything up. Same with NORAD, you know. We're just here, and there's an agreement to let the United States guard the North, but we're not really holding up our end of the bargain. That's why you might not know about this, but Russia flies all over our North. They got ships going in to the North, trying to lay claim because we aren't patrolling like we're supposed to be. But anyways, the Naked Communist: communism, liberalism, socialism, progressivism, national socialism, New World Order, globalists, the United Nations, and the American Democratic Party's 45 goals to destroy the United States. So it's not just the communists anymore. All of these people, friends, they're all doing this. And we're going to listen to something, and we're going to look at this, and you might be against communism, or I'm sorry, you might be all about communism and socialism and think they're wonderful things. And you might have heard of this book. If you go look this up, you're going to find people dismissing this book and quote unquote debunking this book, but it's true. And the people that are trying to make light of this book are the very people that are useful puppets to try and condition society to go along with this whole agenda. But when you listen to this as we go through it, friends, you're going to see these points are happening. So if Mr. Cleon Skousen is a crackpot and was a crackpot, then why are his predictions coming true? Why are the things that he said? So on January 10th, 1963, the book came out in like 1958. Congressman Albert S. Hurlong Jr. of Florida read a list of 45 communist goals into the congressional record. The list was derived from researcher and former FBI agent Cleon Skousen's book, The Naked Communist. So Cleon spent a great deal of time investigating and researching how had the Soviet Union been working all over the world in order to bring forth their goals, and what were they doing in the United States. These principles are well worth revisiting today in order to gain insights into the thinking and strategies of much of our so-called liberal elite. And friends, you know, you might call yourself a liberal and not like the right, not like conservatism, but you're going to see as we continue through this journey, through this investigation, as we go down the rabbit hole, you're on the wrong side of history. And you're being used, you've been conditioned, you've been indoctrinated, just as I was going through high school and our public education system. So, here's a video you can check out if you want to. 45 Communist Goals from the Naked Communist, Exposing Communism and Restoring Freedom.
Current Communist Goals. 1. U.S. acceptance of coexistence as the only alternative to atomic war.
So basically saying, whoa, atomic war is so bad. Well, then we should just agree to exist while the Soviet Union does. And that's happened, friends. But the Soviet Union doesn't exist anymore. Wait for it.
2. U.S. willingness to capitulate in preference to engaging in atomic war.
Note, these encapsulate the Kennan Doctrine, which advocated for the containment of communism, establishment figures supporting the amoral containment policy at least implicitly worked with the communists in scaring the wits out of the American people concerning atomic war. President Ronald Reagan undid the doctrine when he took an aggressive stand against the evil empire by backing freedom fighters from around the world that were struggling against the left-wing communist jackboot. As a result, the Soviet Union and its satellites imploded, a considerable and unexpected setback to the international communist edifice. So a lot of people thought, Ronald Reagan, his Contra war and everything were just a goofy joke, and it was and Congress voted down any involvement there because they didn't want it. The Democrats were saying, we don't want another Vietnam War, when it was the Democrats during the Vietnam War that had no will whatsoever to beat the Vietnamese. And the NVA, the North Vietnamese Army, would have been beaten. You can go look at different books written by soldiers, Marines, and whatnot that actually fought in that conflict. And they said themselves, the reason we're not winning is because it seems like the people in control making the shots don't actually want us to win. So it was a gross, long, drawn-out war where lots and lots of people died. And it's probably because the people that were in charge did not want to defeat a communist stronghold in that nation. And then later on, we have the Contras, and Congress voted down the involvement because they didn't want another Vietnam War. And the unfortunate reality is, friends, it wasn't about colonialism. It wasn't about, well, I mean, sometimes sure, there's a bit of that nation building or whatever, which is gross, but like communism is, as you're going to see, such an evil that you got to fight it at all fronts. We'll find out later that even the collapse of the Soviet Union was probably something that was agreed upon to another end, which is creepy.
3. Develop the illusion that total disarmament by the United States would be a demonstration of moral strength. 4. So, again, we had the agreements. Note, the nuclear freeze advocates supported a freeze on American nuclear development only. Rarely were Soviet nukes or those of other nations mentioned in their self-righteous tirades. The same advocates now call for reducing American military might, which we saw hugely under Obama. That was one of the things that Trump actually was voted in for. Make America Great Again was not about white supremacy, friends. It was the reality that the military had been totally downgraded, was no longer seen as much of a threat. And so China was doing all kinds of crazy things. If you go look into it, China has been building man-made islands all over the Pacific Ocean in order to increase their increase the area that they can operate from and hold on to. And so, like, no one was stopping that. And so people wanted a stronger military. That's why so many people in the military support President Trump. Same advocates now call for reducing American military might, claiming that there's something immoral about America preserving its military preeminence in the world. Like, you need a police force. It's the reality. It's the reality that's there. And unfortunately, you get something like the United States, and you get intentions that are good and some good people leading the way. Meanwhile, you have evil people surreptitiously working in the deep state, that's a real thing, doing all kinds of gross stuff in order to commandeer what's going on. Permit free trade between all nations, regardless of communist affiliation, and regardless of whether or not items could be used for war.
Today, there are calls to end the embargo on the slave island of Cuba. There were complaints about the embargo against Iraq, and I'm pretty sure Obama lifted the whole situation with Cuba. And friends, like, Chavez was an evil dude, killing his own journalists and stuff. It's bizarre that it's bizarre. There were complaints about the embargo against Iraq, and the U.S., not Saddam Hussein, was blamed for the suffering of the Iraqi people. Would they have advocated for free trade with Hitler and his National Socialist regime? I don't know. But, we saw Obama also lifting different sanctions against Iran and freeing up $150 billion that Iran had in different banking institutions or something like that. Iran, unfortunately, wants to do a lot of harm in the world.
5. Extension of long-term loans to Russia and Soviet satellites. 6. Provide American aid to all nations regardless of communist domination.
Such aid and trade over decades contributed greatly to the left-wing communist liquidation of over 100 million people worldwide. That means extermination, killing, according to the well-documented Black Book of Communism. This aid and trade marks a shameful chapter in American history. Without the aid and trade, the left-wing international communist behemoth would have imploded on its own rot a lot sooner, and umpteen millions would have been saved from poverty, misery, starvation, and death. That is true.
7. Grant recognition of Red China. Admission of Red China to the UN.
That's happened. Like, this is in 1958 when he read this stuff. No, not only did President Jimmy Carter fulfill this goal, but he also betrayed America's allies in Nicaragua, El Salvador, Iran, Afghanistan, Angola, and elsewhere. Yeah, Jimmy Carter was not the nice guy that he's put up to be.
8. Set up East and West Germany as separate states, in spite of Khrushchev's promise in 1955 to settle the Germany question by free elections under the supervision of the UN.
Interesting.
9. Prolong the conferences to ban atomic tests because the U.S. has agreed to suspend tests as long as negotiations are in progress. 10. Allow all Soviet satellites individual representation in the UN.
Happened.
11. Promote the UN as the only hope for mankind.
Happening.
If its charter is rewritten, demand that it be set up as a one-world government with its own independent armed forces.
Happening.
Some
No, there are still American intellectuals and elected members of Congress who dream of an eventual one-world government and who view the UN, founded by communists such as Alger Hiss, the first Secretary General, as the instrument to bring this about. World government was also the dream of Adolf Hitler. Friends, the Third Reich actually stands for Third Kingdom. That's what a Reich is. So he wanted his kingdom to spread out all over. And J.V. Stalin, Joseph Stalin, of course, of the Soviet Union. World government was the dream of Osama bin Laden and the 9/11 hijackers. No doubt. It's called the Caliphate.
communist leaders believe the world can be taken over as easily by the UN as by Moscow. Sometimes these two centers compete with each other, as they are now doing in the Congo. 12. Resist any attempt to outlaw the Communist Party. 13. Do away.
So we've all heard of McCarthyism. That was under President MacArthur, where they were trying to hunt down communists within the United States. And I don't know what they're charging them with, but they wanted them out of the government and everything. And people look back at that and make fun and say, like, how horrible it was, how dare he. You know, there's a big difference between permitting free speech and free thought and allowing your country to be undermined and attacked from within. And that's exactly what happened. And we're going to look at, I mean, you're seeing it already. You're seeing these goals have already been fulfilled. But we're going to be looking, just so that there's a bit of a teaser here. This gentleman is Yuri Bezmenov. Deception was my job. Full interview. Yuri Bezmenov was a KGB agent, okay, who operated as a in journalism in India to try and sway India to adopt communist policies. And so not every KGB agent is a James Bond kind of spy. Like we talked about that before. Yeah. So we're going to be watching him do an interview, telling how he operated and how he defected and what the whole plan is.
With all loyalty oaths. 14.
All right, so while the idea of banning any political party runs contrary to notions of American freedom and liberty, notions that are the exact opposite of those held by the left-wing communists themselves, nevertheless, these goals sought to undermine the constitutional obligation of Congress to investigate subversion. The weakening of our government's ability to conduct such investigations led to the attack of 9/11. Well, isn't that interesting? I imagine because they weren't allowed to exercise their full extent in trying to track down what Osama bin Laden's people were doing while in the States. And 9/11's a whole nother mess too. Osama bin Laden was actually a CIA agent at one point, and I think he just became disenfranchised with everything, and then wanted to strike back at the America that created him and who he hated. Do away with loyalty oaths. Note, it is entirely proper and appropriate for our government to expect employees paid by the American taxpayer to take an oath of loyalty to the nation, to the flag. So, yeah, we've seen that. Different places, you know, they don't pledge allegiance in some schools in the morning. And in Canada, we've seen this sort of same thing too. They don't even want to sing the national anthem.
Continue giving Russia access to the U.S. Patent Office.
Okay, I don't know about that. It's probably happening.
15. Capture one or both of the political parties in the United States.
That has definitely happened. It's the Democrat Party, and here in Canada, it's the Liberal Party, the NDP, the New Democratic Party. Okay, the People's Party, the party for the people, the Union Party. Baloney, friends. Look at everything they believe. The Green Party, it's all about environmentalism and socialism. Even our Conservative Party is so far left of what real conservatism is. It is an absolute shame. We are in dire straits. You'll see as we continue looking at this. Oh, right. In his book, Reagan's War, Peter Schweitzer demonstrates the astonishing degree to which communists and communist sympathizers have penetrated the Democratic Party. In his book, Schweitzer writes about the presidential election of 1979. The Democratic Party, even like under Obama, had like people like Hillary's friend there. I forget what her name is. Anyways, people tied to the Islamic State, the very extreme radicals that want a caliphate all over the world. And it's still going on. Now we have people like Ilhan Omar. Anyways, I think there's 3 different members of the Democratic Party that in the States that are tied to radical Islam. And here in Canada, oh my gosh, so much is going on. If you follow a guy named Tom Quiggin, he's a Canadian researcher and former member of CSIS. He's worked for the RCMP, been in the military, doing intelligence and whatnot, and he's actually a court-certified expert on terrorism. And yeah, he's divulged so much of what's going on. I forget what it was called. I made a video about it last year. The Qatar Papers, right? The nation of Qatar, which is a radical Muslim country that wants to spread radical Islam all over the world. They fund people in our political parties. They're tied to the liberals. They had people getting into the Conservative Party. And the Conservative Party was letting it happen just because they wanted so badly to win some seats down near the Greater Toronto area. They're tied to the NDP as well as the Greens, I think. Yeah, it's pretty gross. There was only one political party they weren't tied to. It was a party that just started last year and that only 300,000 people voted for.
16. Use technical decisions of the courts to weaken basic American institutions by claiming their activities violate civil rights.
This strategy goes back to the founding of the American Civil Liberties Union by Fabian socialists Roger Baldwin and John Dewey, and communists William Z. Foster and Elizabeth Gurley Flynn, among others. So these were organizations actually in the United States to further the cause of socialism and communism.
17. Get control of the schools. Use them as transmission belts for socialism and current communist propaganda. Soften the curriculum. Get control of teachers' associations. Put the party line in textbooks.
That has definitely happened. Friends, you may not be aware. Remember the Dewey Decimal System in our libraries before we had computers to look up books, and how you would like have the cards with the dots. They probably still have these things on the books, but John Dewey is the guy that's named after. And I guess they named it after him because he was so influential in our school systems. But his philosophies of how children should learn and everything took over every learning institution, every teaching institution in the West, really. And he himself had gone to the Soviet Union and came back and just thought it was just the most wonderful thing over there. I wrote about him in my free ebook, if you ever want to look at that, over at hehasanswers.com. But yeah, I talk about the reality that the education system has been totally usurped to keep pumping out kids that are thinking just on one side of the political spectrum. And I was one of those people. I thought socialism was so cool. I thought it was the way for everyone to get along and be taken care of and stuff. But yeah.
18. Gain control of all student newspapers.
That's definitely happened.
19. Use student riots to foment public protests against programs or organizations which are under communist attack.
That's happening.
20. Infiltrate.
The success of these goals from a communist perspective is obvious. Is there any doubt this is so? I mean, if you don't see, we're going to be looking at some groups later on when we look at how false the media is and how skewed it is. And you'll see from their very own mouths, founders of these very well-known organizations, the same ones that are actually peacefully protesting today, they claim, that they're Marxist and they have an agenda to destroy the United States and any Western nation that is opposing their communist and Marxist goals.
Infiltrate the press. Get control of book review assignments, editorial writing, and policy-making positions.
Our news media is bought and paid for by the left. We have that, so it's obvious in the United States. That's why 95% of stories about President Trump are negative, regardless of any good that he's doing. They just constantly pump out junk. We'll be looking later on at a list of his accomplishments and the things that he's actually done to help benefit the American people, especially black people in America. They have like they had, not anymore because of COVID and the rioting and everything, but they had one of the lowest unemployment rates they'd had in decades because there were so many jobs open. It was really great. But the news smears them constantly. Here in Canada, as we all know, the Liberals fund CBC entirely, over $1 billion. And they had a $600 million bailout package for all of the news groups that couldn't compete with online news media and alternative news media sources where people are now getting their news. And the only stipulation, of course, was that they had to agree with what the Liberals were doing. Like they had to get the okay. Just bizarre.
21. Gain control of key positions in radio, TV, and motion pictures.
That's happened. We've already talked about how movies are used as propaganda, but it's in TV, it's in everything.
22. Continue discrediting American culture by degrading all forms of artistic expression.
Yep.
An American communist cell was told to eliminate all good sculpture from parks and buildings, substitute shapeless, awkward, and meaningless forms.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so a communist cell, an American communist cell. Now, you've probably heard the word cell in reference to terrorist cells, which is just a group of small people, clandestine, like working secretly in somewhere where they're trying to bring about their own agenda, So a terrorist cell might be building bombs in a department to blow up trains and people in order to push fear and get nations to cow and bow down to their desires, which unfortunately we see all the time. Like you can't negotiate with terrorists. They don't give up. They keep pushing. So we have American communist cells, groups of communists working inside America to do this very thing. And let's just real quick here. Postmodern art. Let's look at some images. Okay, well, some of these are actually like some things, but so often postmodern art is, oh, well, good Lord. It's nothing. It's meaningless. I mean, well, what the heck is this? Abstract art, Yay, look, it's the Chinese Communist Party or something. So they've definitely taken over. in that regards. And I mean, it's sad, but you go talk to your artist friends. Who are they voting for? What do they believe? What philosophies do they follow? Right? Almost none of them are conservative. Why is that? How is that possible? If in a society you have roughly 50% conservative and 50% liberal, how is it possible that almost everyone you know in the arts thinks one way?
23. Control art critics and directors of art museums.
Yeah.
Our plan is to promote ugliness, repulsive, meaningless art.
That's a quote. So I mean, someone in the Soviet Union said that at some point.
4. Eliminate all laws governing obscenity by calling them censorship and a violation of free speech and free press.
What did we see with pornography? Did anybody remember that movie, something Larry Flint, about the guy that started Penthouse? How he actually went to the Supreme Court and said, "You're infringing on my freedom of expression, my freedom of speech." And they said, "Oh, okay, sure, you can put out these lewd magazines, and that's not going to affect society negatively, affect culture negatively." That was their goal.
25. Break down cultural standards of morality by promoting pornography and obscenity in books, magazines, motion pictures, radio, and TV.
This is a communist goal. This is written in 1958. Based on FBI guy's research. What are we seeing? Note, this is the Gramscian agenda of the... What is this? Real quick here. Definition. It's always good to know a definition. Antonio Francesco Gramsci was an Italian Marxist philosopher, looks like a nice guy, and communist politician. He wrote on political theory, blah, 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 blah. Gramscian definition. Gramscian. Of or pertaining to the Italian Marxist theoretician and politician Antonio Gramsci, or his works. Obviously. Well, in any case, this is the Gramscian agenda of the long march through the institutions. Okay, so long march, friends. They understood you could do it quickly through war, but a lot of people you want to take over and control would die, and it'd be very costly. Or you take your time slowly infiltrating every institution, which is what they've been doing. Spelled out explicitly, gradual takeover of the means of communication. So media, the way we get messaging and then learn and think, and then using those vehicles to debauch the culture and weaken the will of the individual to resist. Wow. Why is it that the less morality we have, the harder it is to resist this sort of a agenda?
20.
This is going to upset some people, all right? I'm sorry we're going to burst some bubbles, but this is the communist agenda. And in my book, man, it talks all about the reality of this.
6. Present homosexuality, degeneracy, and promiscuity as normal, natural, and healthy.
This is exactly what Alfred Kinsey did. We saw that. And remember, friends, Alfred Kinsey said he was getting questionnaires and surveys filled out by your normal, average American citizen, when really him and his team went to the prisons, which were filled with people that have no thought of consequence. So, of course, their sexual behavior is going to look drastically different. We also talked about the reality that present day statistics say that homosexual men are about 1.6 or so percent of the population, whereas Kinsey found it was 10%. But that's what happens when you are talking to prison inmates who have decided to get off. They will have sex with other men. Note, today, those few who still have the courage to advocate public morality are denounced and viciously attacked. That's true. Some of the people viewing this right now or viewing this later are going to look at what I just said, and they're going to say I'm a bigot and I'm hateful. I'm not. I love all people. It's just there are unfortunately realities that there are things that are just damaging to a person's soul and to a society at large. Most Americans are entirely unwitting regarding the motives behind this agenda. We just watched it on our sitcoms. We watched it in our movies. We watched it in our ads and just thought, oh, okay, well, whatever, each to their own, as long as you're not hurting anybody else. In my book, I actually go into the reality, and this is going to be hard to hear. David Thorstad and Harry, oh my gosh, what was his name? Anyways, these two individuals, prominent spokespeople of the male homosexual movement back in the 60s, both of them advocated for pedophilia, pederasty, often. Harry, what's his face? Oh, he's got a book. He has a book that came out later on, which was just so gross. But he marched with a NAMBLA reference on his clothing, and in one of the sexual revolution parades. And NAMBLA is North American Man Boy Love Association. Oh, look, everybody left. I lost my viewers because of this. I had 5, then I had 3, then I had 1, now I have 2 again. But people left because we spoke the truth, friends. Imagine that. To hear the truth about a communist agenda that is destroying the world, and then you hear one thing you don't like, and you just tune out. Oh, I don't like this. Imagine turning off something that's warning you because you don't like it and you disagree with it. It doesn't matter if you disagree with it. I love that Ben Shapiro says, facts don't care about your feelings. And we have to get to that point, friends. We have to get to that point. It's a hard pill to swallow, but at least hang in there. Watch the whole thing and then weigh it. And if there's that one thing you don't like, well then fine, disagree with that one thing still. But look at all the rest of the truth. And then hopefully at some point you'll realize, gosh, this is all true. But yeah, so David Thorstad and Harry What's-His-Face, both of them advocated for pederasty. They believed it was inhumane to take away the right of a child to decide whom they should be able to have sex with. They were fighting for the rights for all people of all ages to do whatever they wanted sexually, even with animals. This is in their own writing. It's all cited. I got footnotes of it all. I even talk about the people that tried to debunk it. Like, oh, he was only being, he was only trying to be like, what's the word? Speaking of Harry wearing this NAMBLA thing in the protest march, he was only trying to, draw attention or whatever. But that's not true when you look at all of his writings. Anyways, back to this. Most Americans and Canadians are unwitting regarding the motives behind this agenda.
27. Infiltrate the churches and replace revealed religion with social religion.
This has happened, friends. It is so sad right now what we're seeing. So many evangelical churches are all about social justice apart from anything that the Bible actually talks about. It's all about just do good, do good, do good. That's it. That's where we leave the message. They don't talk about the truth of God, the love of God, the justice of God, the wrath of God, the grace of God, the mercy of God. It's all about just doing things. And we're seeing a huge move in that right now. It's a false religion. It's very sad. But that's what the communists wanted. And we're going to learn from Mr. Yuri Bezmenov that communists infiltrated every institution, including the seminaries. So people going to seminary to learn how to be a pastor would have their minds moved in the direction of socialism, the idea that Jesus was a pacifist, the idea that Christianity is about socialism because it's about helping one another and sharing with one another. It's so evil.
Discredit the Bible and emphasize the need for intellectual maturity, which does not need a religious crutch.
That's right. This has been largely accomplished through the communist infiltration of the National Council of Churches, Conservative and Reform, Judaism, and the Catholic seminaries. Yep.
28. Eliminate prayer or any phase of religious expression in the schools on the ground that it violates the principle of separation of church and state.
In Canada, even up to the mid 70s, you prayed in school after you sang the national anthem. And the Ten Commandments was everywhere. People were raised with these things. And it's fine. You don't want to believe in God. I mean, it's not fine. It's unfortunate. And I hope that you'll reconsider one day. But yeah, it's the unfortunate reality that the communist agenda was to take that stuff out. Friends, ask yourself, why are the communists so hard up on Christianity? Why don't they want Christianity? Oh my gosh, it's crazy. And why again and again in countries that they took over and put the Soviet system in, did they impose themselves upon the churches? Well, I'll tell you why. It's because Christianity brings freedom, brings the most freedom everywhere it goes. And you don't believe that? Go look up a guy named William Wilberforce from Britain.
29. Discredit the American Constitution by calling it inadequate, old-fashioned, out of step with modern needs, a hindrance to cooperation between nations on a worldwide basis.
I should just add that the idea of separation of church and state, that's not in the American Constitution. It was from a letter that Jefferson had wrote to some minister, some parish or something, saying, don't worry, the government's never going to get in the way of how you worship. Because over in England, where everyone had come from to the United States, you had the Anglican Church. And so the Anglican Church wanted to say to evangelical churches, Baptist churches, Presbyterian churches, whatever, that they could not worship that way. I don't think the Baptist denomination was started yet, but that's the idea of it. And so it had nothing to do with saying that there could be no mention of God in a state-funded institution. That is a lie from these same people in order to get it out.
30. Discredit the American Founding Fathers. Present them as selfish aristocrats who had no concern for the common man. 31. Belittle all forms.
Sorry, I missed that. I was checking someone's text. Discredit the American Founding Fathers. Yeah, we're seeing that all over. They're tearing down their statues right now. Washington might have owned a slave, guys. Meanwhile, this dude helped lead the military against the British that were oppressing them in order to create the freest nation that's ever been. My goodness. Present them as selfish aristocrats who had no concern for the common man. Not true at all. You go back and read the things that they wrote. Oh my gosh.
Forms of American culture and discourage the teaching of American history on the ground that it was only a minor part of the big picture. Give more emphasis to Russian history since the communists took over.
Obliterating the American past with its antecedents and principles of freedoms, liberty, and private ownership is a major goal of the communists then and now. And we learned a lot about socialism and communism and stuff in Canadian high school.
32. Support any socialist movement to give centralized control over any part of the culture. Education, social agencies, welfare programs, mental health clinics, etc.
And the funny thing is, friends, government almost always does it poorly. They always run over budget. They have very little concern for fiscal responsibility because every time the end of the month comes up and they're short on funds, you just ask for more money from the tax tree. And that means more of our money going to them. It's ridiculous. Again and again, you see failure. Even in the Canadian healthcare system where, where it's supposed to be this wonderful thing. There's a reason we have like 6 to 18-month wait times for like knee replacements and hip replacements and stuff, things that are considered elective surgeries. It's because we have a budgetary cap, okay? So a surgeon who's a Canadian doctor, a Canadian surgeon, doesn't have enough money in his operating budget to just be doing these surgeries hand over fist, okay? And so if he's doing it so because it's being done in our system, a person waits on that list in pain forever and ever and ever. And, you know, it's so unfortunate. So they can only do like however many a week. Whereas if they were down in the United States in a privatized system, they can just keep doing them. And there's all kinds of arguments about the insurance and how expensive it is and how insurance doesn't cover everything and blah, 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 blah. But at the end of the day, our system is not ideal. It's not.
33. Eliminate all laws or procedures which interfere with the operation of the communist apparatus.
Yep.
34. Eliminate the House Committee on Un-American Activities.
That probably happened.
35. Discredit and eventually dismantle the FBI.
That hasn't happened.
36. Infiltrate and gain control of more unions.
But the deep state is so embedded in the FBI, and we saw that with James Comey, who was the head of the FBI before he was removed. Yeah, definitely working for the wrong side. Infiltrate and gain control of more unions. Well, that's obviously happened.
37.
I mean, the NDP in Canada controls and influences so many of the unions. And in the last election, there were actually ridings that where the EDAs, the electoral district associations, the people that kind of helped the candidates and whatever, they left the NDP because they knew that the NDP did not have people's best interests at heart. And the NDP were protecting unfair work situations that were actually negative for your common person. Like, for example, with the dairy cartel. The dairy cartel in Canada, we pay a whole bunch of money and artificially protect the dairy farmers, and they are permitted to charge like twice as much as they really should for milk and our eggs and our poultry and everything. And so it ends up being like a hidden tax of about $600 per household per year. You're paying $600 extra if you have a family of 4 when you buy your eggs and your milk and your cheese and your yogurt and stuff. But they didn't want that anymore.
Infiltrate and gain control of big business. 38. Transfer some of the powers of arrest from the police to social agencies. Treat all behavioral problems as psychiatric disorders, which no one but psychiatrists can understand or treat.
And we're seeing that. And so now people are victims of their upbringing, victims of their environment. They're no longer criminals. We have to feel sorry for them. It's just bizarre. And we saw in the last episode how because of Kinsey's influence, or maybe that's the documentary I watched on my own, but it was all about Alfred Kinsey. Because of his influence, many nations have lowered the punishments for pedophiles because it's been not decriminalized, but just become less of a thing warranting punishment. Yeah.
39.
Oh, note, psychiatry remains a bulwark of the communist agenda of fostering self-criticism and docility, so being docile.
9. Dominate the psychiatric profession and use mental...
Oh, sorry about that. I skipped ahead. Note, and this is back in 38, the Soviets used to send social misfits and those deemed politically incorrect to massive mental institutions called gulags. That's true. The Red Chinese called them Lao Gay. Hitler called them concentration camps. So, I mean, in China, you look into this, they have re-education camps right now. And it's sad, even Muslims, I think, well, probably happens to Christians too, because, the Christian church is heavily persecuted in China. But they're harvesting organs and stuff and selling them on the black market. It's just so evil, so evil. But yeah, you disagree politically, and they deem you crazy, and then they send you off, re-educate you, maybe even put you in intensive shock therapy, giving you basically a lobotomy through electric current.
Health laws as a means of gaining coercive control over those who oppose communist goals.
Note, psychiatry remains a bulwark of the communist agenda of fostering self-criticism and docility.
40. Discredit the family as an institution. encourage promiscuity and easy divorce.
Okay, so friends who just tuned in, we're going through the different goals of communists and Marxists in order to destroy Western nations, in order to take them over from within. Who here, show of hands, I will be watching the comments, can disagree that we have not had a massive, massive push to discredit the family, like husband, wife, father, mother? You don't need that to have a healthy family. That's foolishness. Look how stupid dads are. Look at Homer Simpson. What a goofball. Look how dumb Tim the Toolman Taylor was. What an idiot. You don't need a dad like that in a family. You're better off having a single mother. You know, encourage promiscuity. Hello. Swipe left, swipe right, Tinder. Easy divorce. No fault divorce, you know? I mean, we're just not in love with each other. Let's just try again, you know, which is just so sad. So we're seeing this. This was written in like 1958. It's 2020. Everything in here is being fulfilled. We're getting closer and closer to the implosion of our beautiful nation, Canada, and every other great nation that was founded on Judeo-Christian principles and was very free. It's sad, but we're on our way. Note, done. The sovereign family is the single most powerful obstacle to authoritarian control. It's true. It's true. It's true. When you've got a healthy family, it makes a healthy community, and yeah, you don't want to see that go away.
41. Emphasize the need to raise children away from the negative influence of parents. Attribute prejudices, mental blocks, and retarding of children to suppressive influence of parents.
Again, you know, totally happening. Homeschooling is frowned upon. They at every turn try and fight homeschooling, and in many countries they do what they can to make it against the law. Yeah, it is. It's bad, and kids, you know, they go to school and they say something that goes against the agenda, and now their parents are brought in. Sometimes they even have social services come and take the kids away. In Germany, I'll just look this up super fast. Germany, homeschoolers raid police. Oh, look, images for Germany. Homeschoolers raid police. Children seized in shocking raid. August 30th, 2013. Let's look at some of these. Police raid home. Seize children of homeschooling family. Oh, this is SWAT. SWAT raid against Christian homeschooling family? A bit much. No, in Germany it would be GSG 9, I imagine. But the accusation was they weren't teaching their kids properly and they weren't teaching them everything they needed to know. Give me a break. They're probably teaching them like the Bible and creationism or something. Ugh. And if anyone wants to watch the video, it's this one here.
42. Create the impression that violence and insurrection are legitimate aspects of the American tradition.
Just back to 41 here. Note, outcome-based education, values clarification, or whatever they're calling it this year.
That students and special interest groups should rise up and use united force to solve economic, political, or social problems.
This describes the dialectical fostering of group consciousness and conflict, which furthers the interests of authoritarianism. So there's a huge difference, friends, with a necessary revolution. Right now, what's going on in the States and even like in other places, oddly enough, people are saying this is a revolution. It's really necessary. Totally different situations and climates compared to what the American Revolution was all about. And but here we are, you know, proof in the pudding. People that are radical Marxists and whatever, just rising up and destroying in order to cause instability and the collapse of free nations.
43. Overthrow all colonial governments before native populations are ready for self-government. 44. Internationalize the Panama Canal.
I'm not sure if that's true, or if that's happened, probably.
45. Repeal the Connolly Reservation so the U.S. cannot prevent the World Court from seizing jurisdiction over domestic problems. Give the World Court jurisdiction over nations and individuals alike.
I don't know about that, but anyways, he finishes by saying, "My child, you must not have fear at speaking the truth. It is for the salvation of souls and the recovery of your country. America, the beautiful, must not fall to communism. My child, America the beautiful shall not be sold into slavery. Cast out the money changers in your government. What manner of government is there that condones sin, abomination upon abomination, giving monies for the murder of children, giving monies for the murder of the elderly? Your government, my child, has been infiltrated by men of sin." Our Lady of the Roses, September 13th, 1975. I don't know what that is about. It seems like a weird play on the Bible's scripture, but in any case, we go back and we look at all 45 of these things. Almost all of them have definitely happened. Some that I don't know have happened. It's just because I'm unfamiliar with them, like about the Panama Canal. And now we're going to look. So this was from 1958, written in The Naked Communist. There you go. You can go to Amazon.ca. Here's the audio book. And yeah, now we're going to watch this hour-long interview with Yuri Bezmenov, former KGB. But friends, this is why all the pedophilia and stuff and all the underage sexuality and all the depravity was going on that we learned about in the last three. Not only did these people enjoy it for some sick reason, I guess because they get high on the idea that they're gods and they can do whatever they want in life, but they want to demoralize and collapse society.
My father was, he's on the left here, my father was officer of the General Staff of the Soviet Army. He was inspector of land forces, Soviet troops stationed in countries like Mongolia, Cuba, East European countries. This is the picture taken at the entrance of my Institute of Oriental Languages. It's a part of Moscow State University. As every Soviet student, I was, quote-unquote, volunteering for harvesting grain in Kazakhstan. By the end of my training in school, I was recruited by the KGB. This picture was taken on that day, and you can see again how happy it feels to be recruited by the KGB. Pay special attention to number of bottles on the table. One of my functions was to keep foreign guests permanently intoxicated the moment they land at Moscow airport. In 1967, the KGB attached me to this magazine, Look magazine. A group of 12 people arrived to USSR from United States to cover the 50th anniversary of October Socialist Revolution in my country. From the first page to the last page, it was a package of lies.
Subversion of the free world press. Conversation with Yuri Bezmenov, former propagandist for the KGB. Host G. Edward Griffin. So this guy's a truther before there were truthers.
Our conversation is with Mr. Yuri Alexandrovich Bezmenov. Mr. Bezmenov was born in 1939 in a suburb of Moscow. He was the son of a high-ranking Soviet Army officer. He was educated in the elite schools inside the Soviet Union and became an expert in Indian culture and Indian languages. He had an outstanding career with Novosti, which was the, and still is, I should say, the press arm or the press agency of the Soviet Union. It turns out that this is also a front for the KGB. One of his interesting assignments was to brainwash foreign diplomats when they visited Moscow. And he'll tell us a little bit about how they did this and how they planted information which eventually wound up in the press of the free world. He escaped to the West in 1970 after becoming totally disgusted with the Soviet system, and he did this at great risk to his life. He certainly is one of the world's outstanding experts on the subject of Soviet propaganda and disinformation and active measures. Mr. Bezmenov, I'd like to begin by having you tell us a little bit about some of your childhood memories.
Well, the most vivid memory of my childhood was Second World War, or to be more precise, the end of the Second World War, when all of a sudden United States, from a friendly nation, which helped us to defeat Nazism, turned overnight into a deadly enemy. And it was very shocking because all newspapers were trying to present an image of belligerent, aggressive American imperialism. Most of the things that we were taught is that United States is aggressive power, which is just about to invade our beautiful, free, socialist country, that American CIA is dropping Colorado beetles on our beautiful potato fields to eliminate our crops. And each schoolboy had a picture of Colorado bug on the back page of his notebook. And we were instructed to go into collective fields to search for those little Colorado bugs. Of course, we couldn't find any. Neither we could find many potatoes. And that was explained again by the encroachments of the decadent imperialist power. The anti-American paranoia, hysteria in the Soviet propaganda was to such of such a higher degree that many less skeptical people or less stubborn would really believe that the United States is just about to invade our beautiful motherland, and some secretly hope that it will come true.
That's interesting.
Yes.
Yeah, they want
Well,
freedom.
getting back to life inside the Soviet Union or inside communist countries in general, in this country, at the university level primarily, we read and hear that the Soviet system is different from ours, but not that different, and that there is a convergence developing between all of the systems of the world, and that really it doesn't make an awful lot of difference what system you live under, because you have corruption and dishonesty and tyranny and all that sort of thing. From your
that's
personal
true.
experience, what is the difference between life under communism and life in the United States?
Well, life is obviously very much different for simple reason that the Soviet Union is a state capitalist economically. It's a state capitalism where an individual has absolutely no rights, no value. His life is nothing. It's just like an insect. He is disposable. Whereby in the United States, even the worst criminal is treated as a human being. He has a fair trial, and some of them capitalize on their crimes. They publish their memoirs in their prisons and get handsomely paid by your crazy publishers. The differences, of course, in the daily life are very various, depending on whom we are talking about. In my own private life, I never suffered from communism simply because I was brought up in a family of high-ranking military officer. Most of the doors were open for me. Most of my expenses were paid by the government, and I never had any troubles with the authorities or with the police. So, in other words, I would say I enjoyed, or I had good reasons to enjoy all the advantages of so-called socialist system.
Mm-hmm.
My main motivations to defect had nothing to do with affluence. It was mainly moral indignation, moral protest, rebellion against the inhuman methods of the Soviet system.
Well, specifically, what did you object to?
I objected, first of all, against oppression of my own dissidents and intellectuals. And that was the most disgusting thing that I witnessed as a young man, young student, who was brought up a very troublesome period in our history, from Stalin to Khrushchev, from total tyranny and oppression to some kind of liberalization. Second, when I started working for the Soviet embassy in India, to my horror, I discovered that we are millions times more oppressive than any colonial or imperialist power in the history of mankind. That my country brings to India not freedom, progress, and friendship between the nations, but racism, exploitation, and slavery, and of course economical inefficiency to this country. Since I fell in love with India, I developed something which by KGB standards is extremely dangerous thing. It's called split loyalty, when an agent likes a country of assignment more than his own country.
Wow.
I literally fell in love with this beautiful country, a country of great contrasts, but also great humility, great tolerance, and philosophical and intellectual freedoms. My ancestors used to live in caves and eat raw meat when India was a highly civilized nation 6,000 years ago. So obviously the choice was not to the advantage of my own nation, I decided to defect and to entirely dissociate myself from that brutal regime.
Mr. Bezmenov, we've read a lot about the concentration camps and the slave labor camps under the Stalin regime. Now the general impression in America is that those things are part of the past. Are they still going on today, or what is the status?
Yes. There is no qualitative change in the Soviet concentration camp system. There are changes in numbers of prisoners. Again, this is unreliable Soviet statistics. We don't know how many political prisoners are there in the Soviet concentration camps, but we sure know from various sources that at each particular time there are close to 25 to 30 million of Soviet citizens who are virtually kept as slaves in forced labor camp system. The size of the population of a country like Canada is serving terms as prisoners.
Incredible.
So I would say that those intellectuals who try to convince American public that concentration camp system is a thing of a past are either conscientiously misleading public opinion, or they are not very intellectual people. They're selectively blind. They lack intellectual honesty when they say that.
Well, we've spoken about the intellectuals in this country and also the intellectuals in the Soviet Union. What about down at the broad mass level? Do the people in general, the working people, the workers in general in the Soviet Union, do they support the system? Do they tolerate it? What is their attitude?
Well, average Soviet citizen, if there is such an animal, of course, does not like the system because it hurts, it kills. He may not understand the reasons. He may not have enough information or educational background to understand. But I doubt very much there are many people who are conscientiously supporting the Soviet system. There are not such people in USSR. Even those who have all the reasons to enjoy socialism, people like myself, who were a member of journalistic elite, they also hate the system for different reasons, though. Not because they lack material affluence, but because they are unfree to think, they're in constant fear, duplicity, split personality. And this is the greatest tragedy for my nation.
Well, what do you think are the chances of the people actually overcoming their system or replacing it?
There is a great possibility that system will sooner or later be destroyed from within. There is a self-destructive mechanism built into any socialist or communist or fascist system. Because there is lack of feedback, because the system does not rely upon loyalty of population. But until this Soviet junta is being supported by the Western so-called imperialists, that is, multinational companies, establishments, governments, and let's face it, intellectuals, so-called academia in the United States is famous for supporting the Soviet system. As long as the Soviet junta will keep on receiving credits, money, technology, grain deals, and political recognition from all these traitors of democracy or freedom, there is no hope, there is not much hope for changes in my country, and the system will not collapse by itself simply because it's being nourished by so-called American imperialism. This is the greatest paradox in history of mankind, when capitalist world supports and actively nourishes its own destroyer, destructor.
I think you're trying to tell us something.
Oh,
in
yes.
This country.
I'm trying to tell you that it has to be stopped unless you want to end up in Gulag system and enjoy all the advantages of socialist equality. Working for free, catching fleas on your body, sleeping on the planks of plywood in Alaska this time, I guess. That's where Americans will belong, unless they will wake up, of course, and force their government to stop aiding Soviet fascism.
Well, you told us a moment ago why you...
Isn't it interesting, friends? We are told all the time now that on the right, you got right-wing radicals, nationalists who are this close to being fascists. In fact, they are fascists. How is a guy from communism that's supposedly on the left with socialism, or a little past socialism, how can he call it Soviet fascism? Do you know why? It's because decades ago they switched the definitions, or they switched where things were laid out on the political spectrum. Fascism used to be over here on the other end with all the other systems of control. And over here you had conservatism and libertarianism, and it was about being free.
You left the system. I'd like to hear the details of how you did it. It must have been a very dangerous thing.
It was not so dangerous, it was crazy. First of all, because defecting in India is virtually impossible, thanks to very strong pressure from the Soviet government.
Excuse me, you were in India on assignment at that time?
Yes, I was working for the Soviet embassy in New Delhi as a press officer. And defecting for a Soviet diplomat is next to impossible. It's a suicide, as I said, because a great friend Indira Gandhi pushed a law through parliament which says, and I quote, "No defector from any country has a right of political asylum in any embassy on the territory of Indian Republic," which is a masterpiece of hypocrisy. No other defector but a Soviet one needs a political asylum. So knowing that perfectly well, I planned a craziest possible way to defect. I studied counterculture in India. There were thousands of young American boys and girls with no shoes, long hair, smoking hash and marijuana, studying sometimes Indian philosophy, sometimes simply pretending that they study. And they greatly annoyed Indian police, and they were laughing stock of Indians because obviously they were good-for-nothing students. I studied carefully where they congregate, what routes they travel, what language they speak, what do they smoke. And one day I simply joined a group of hippies to avoid...
So he's probably talking about hippies in the Goa region of India. I actually briefly dated a girl when I was like 21, and yeah, her parents met each other in Goa.
Detection of Indian police. I was dressed as a typical hippie with...
Hey, how's it going, Philip II? Macedonia, right on. That's over in Eastern Europe, right? I think I've been through Macedonia. Cool, cool.
Blue jeans, long camise shirts with all kind of nice decorations like beads, long hairs. I bought a wig because for several weeks I had to turn myself from a conservative Soviet diplomat into a very progressive American hippie. And that was the only way that I could avoid detection. It was very interesting experience, but it was necessary because from my own knowledge as a member of Soviet embassy staff, I knew that there were many cases when Soviet defectors were betrayed by Indian police, and also some Western embassies played a very dirty role in betraying the Soviet defectors. According to our information, they were some, I wouldn't call them double agents, but simply immoral people working for this for the United States Embassy. And confining in people like this would be a suicide. So I had to be extremely careful. I could not trust anyone. And that was the reason for such a crazy way to defect.
Well,
that's crazy to hear him say that people from the American side couldn't be trusted. And I mean, that should speak volumes of just how far the infiltration had gone by this point. I watched a couple movies in the last couple nights just by chance about the CIA, and neither dove as deep as you need to go, but we've already talked about it, the CIA, you know, even though there's probably great people in it that want to do good and protect America and protect freedom, blah, 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 so much darkness in it.
Had you been caught in the act of trying to get out, what would have happened to you?
Oh, most likely I would end up in concentration camp. Or, depending on the situation and on the whim of some bureaucrat in KGB, maybe even executed. This is normal practice. Quietly, of course, not publicly. But that would be the end of my defection, of course.
Well, when did you finally make it to the United States?
In 1970, after about 6 months of debriefing in Athens by the CIA, and I presume FBI too, they let me go first to Germany, then to Canada. That was my decision. I had to change my identity to protect my family and my friends in USSR. And also I was a little bit paranoid knowing that both Soviet KGB and probably some double agents within the American system may be after me. So I wanted to settle down as far away as possible. I requested CIA to give me some kind of new identity and just let me go on my own. And I settled in Canada. I was a student. I changed many professions, from farm help and laundry truck driver to language instructor and broadcaster for Canadian Broadcasting Corporations in Montreal.
CBC.
Well, have you had any threats on your life or any unpleasant?
In about 5 years, KGB eventually discovered that I am working for Canadian Broadcasting. I made a very big mistake. I started working for overseas service of CBC, which is similar to Voice of America, in Russian language. And of course, monitoring service in USSR picked up every new voice,
So, Canadian friends, Great White North, true, strong, free, pay attention to what this guy's about to start saying about Canada.
new announcer they would make it a point to discover who he is. And in 5 years, sure enough, slowly but surely, they discovered that I am not Thomas Schumann, that I am Yuri Alexandrovich Bezmenov, and that I'm working for Canadian Broadcasting, and undermining beautiful détente between Canada and USSR. And the Soviet ambassador Alexander Yakovlev made it his personal effort to discredit me. He complained to Pierre Trudeau, who is known to be a little bit soft on socialism. And the management of CBC behaved in a very strange, cowardly way, unbecoming to representatives of an independent country like Canada. They listened to every suggestion that Soviet ambassador gave.
Wow.
And they started shameful investigation, analyzing content of my broadcasts to USSR. And sure enough, they discovered that some of my statements were probably would be offending to the Soviet Politburo.
So what?
So I had to leave my job. And of course, subtle intimidations. They would say something like, please cross the street carefully because, you know, traffic is very heavy in Quebec.
So that's the KGB now saying to him, because he's defected, well, you better be careful. You might get hit by a car and killed, because they have agents in Canada that will just find out where he is, figure out what routes he takes to get to work, what his habits are. Does he walk somewhere to get coffee at lunchtime or get a sandwich? Does he have to walk to get to a vehicle after work? Great. He does the same thing again and again. That's when we're going to run him over. So, KGB, we're in Canada. But that's not all.
And fortunately, I know about the psychology and the logic of activity of the KGB, and I never allowed myself to be intimidated. This is the worst thing. This is what they expect a person, a defector, to be intimidated.
Not only does the KGB expect a defector to be intimidated, friends, radical leftist Marxists all over today, the people that are the cancel culture, trying to shut everything down, the people that, you know, are on your Facebook friends list telling you to stop talking about the views you have because they're wrong or immoral or whatever, they don't give up. They keep trying to intimidate us from speaking the truth, even if it's compassionately, even if it's graciously.
Once they spot that you are scared, they keep on developing that line. And then
Push.
eventually you either have to give up entirely and work for them, or they neutralize you. They would definitely stop all kind of political activity, which they failed to do in my case, because I was stubbornly working for the Canadian Broadcasting, and in response to their intimidations, I said that, look, this is a free country, and I am as free as you are, and I also can drive very fast, and gun control is not yet established in Canada, so I had a couple of good shotguns in my basement.
Gun control was not firmly established before this was recorded. This is back in the day. You could actually buy a fully automatic weapon in Canada, okay, prior to 1977. What scared KGB, people that probably employed trained assassins, what kept them from coming after him in Canada was the fact that he owned firearms. What more do I have to say? It's not about public safety. You know, it's not about getting rid of your guns or your neighbor's guns in order to make sure a mass shooting never happens again. Oh, and by the way, we're going to look at, in our next episode, we're going to talk all about the gun ban. The Port-au-Prince shooting in Nova Scotia, as horrible as it was, the guy that did all the shooting, he illegally illegally acquired all of his firearms, okay? He didn't even have a license to own a firearm legally. He was also probably a confidential informant working for the RCMP, infiltrating a variety of gangs that were trading drugs and all kinds of illicit activity. So it was a bunch of crap. It was about taking away our guns, and you're going to see so much more about that next time. And yeah, my gosh. I mean, the only way you can protect yourself from a tyrant is a gun, okay? Your freedom of speech is not going to protect you. You can say everything you want as they tighten the grip around your throat and squeeze until you can't breathe anymore. So right now, that order in council that went through banned almost every single firearm that might be, you know, your best chance of resisting a tyrannical government. We got to work hard protesting and voting and using litigation to get that reversed, because it's not going to be good.
So welcome to visit me someday with your Kalashnikovs machine guns. So obviously it didn't work. Intimidation didn't work. So they tried different approach, as I described. They approached on the highest level, on the level of Canadian bureaucracy. And
on that level they were successful.
On that level they were successful. On individual level they failed flat.
Mr. Bezmenov has brought a series of slides with him that he has taken from the Soviet Union, and I think this is a good time to take a look at the slides.
Yes.
Now, the viewers will be able to see these slides as we talk about them.
Yes, this is a collection of slides which are, some of them are snapshots from my family album, some of them are documents which I smuggled from the Soviet embassy, and some are reproductions from local mass media. I usually show them to establish my credibility as a defector. This is a picture of my native town, Mытищи, about 20 miles north from Moscow. Characteristically, there's a statue of Comrade Lenin in the central square. This is myself at the age of 7, again, characteristically, under the statue of Comrade Stalin, extending his friendly hand to peoples of the world. At that age, of course, I was still idealistically minded young communist, and I still believe that sooner or later things will go for better. But I realized that the system stinks, that something is fishy. and that ideology is fake, and the propaganda about advanced Soviet agriculture simply didn't meet the criteria of reality. If they talk about abundance of food and there is none in the stores, there must be something wrong. My father was, he's on the left here, my father was officer of the General Staff of the Soviet Army. He was inspector of land forces, Soviet troops stationed in countries like Mongolia, Cuba, East European countries. Were he alive today, most likely he would be inspecting Soviet troops in Nicaragua, Angola, and many other parts of the world. Fortunately, he died and he didn't see the disgrace, because deep inside he was a Russian patriot. He didn't like the idea of expanding Soviet military might, especially in the areas where we were not welcomed at all. Unlike many other military officers, he was reporting directly to the Minister of Defense, bypassing KGB and diplomatic service. In other words, he was a trusted military professional. And my impression that this type of people are much less hawkish and adventuristic than party bureaucrats in Kremlin. When American mass media describes Soviet military as potentially dangerous counterpart for Pentagon, I simply laugh, because I know better. I know that the most dangerous part of the Soviet power structures are not military at all. Most likely, if they come to power in my country, they'll be more sensible negotiators for nuclear disarmament and withdrawal of the Soviet troops from many parts of the world.
But if someone from the party structure or the KGB structure were to give the orders for a military
they have to obey,
they
yes,
would follow,
because they are professional military. But they, you see, the triangle of power and hate in USSR is the party at the top, the party elite, the oligarchy of the party, then the military and the KGB at the bottom. They hate each other, and the most hated triangle, the most hated corner of the triangle is the Communist Party bureaucrats. They are the most adventuristic, senile megalomaniacs. They can start war, I wouldn't be surprised. Not the military. They know what war is. Yes. At least my father did. This is the picture taken at the entrance of my Institute of Oriental Languages. It's a part of Moscow State University. I graduated in 1963. And I
now, excuse me, which one were you on?
I am on the right.
You're on the right.
And on the left is my my schoolmate Vadim Smirnov, who later was a apparatchik in the Central Committee of the Soviet Union Communist Party.
What is an apparatchik?
It's a functionary, something like civil service in British Empire. Someone who is never fired from the service. He stays there internally. He may not be promoted too high, but he's a dependable bureaucrat who will stay forever. I studied not only languages, but also history, literature, even music. I'm on this picture, I'm trying to learn how to play Indian musical instrument. I even tried to look like an Indian when I was second-year student.
Not bad, really.
Yes, actually it was strongly encouraged by the instructors in my school, because the graduates of my school were later on employed as diplomats, foreign journalists, or spies. As every Soviet student, I was, quote-unquote, volunteering for harvesting grain in Kazakhstan. This is the biggest agricultural blunder of the Soviet government. But I didn't have much choice, of course, because the communist motto borrowed from the Bible says, "Those who do not work shall not eat." And you can see me eating, therefore I was working, and you can see how...
So the irony that an atheistic system, and you can look into it, communism as a whole, the people that put it in place in the Soviet Union, they were atheists. They didn't actually follow the Bible, but they used that one verse out of context for their own purposes.
How happy I was about it. I went through a very extensive physical and military training, including the military games in areas, suburban areas of Moscow. And here, for example, we are on the tour in Arkhangelsk area. And by the end of my training in school, I was recruited by the KGB. This picture was taken on that day, and you can see again how happy it feels to be recruited by the KGB.
I don't know if he's
Our
being
conversation
sarcastic.
with Yuri Alexandrovich Bezmenov, who is a defector from the Soviet Union, a former propaganda agent for Novosti and the KGB, will continue after this message.
Oh my gosh.
All right. As every student in USSR, I went through very extensive physical and military training and civil defense training too. Unlike in the United States, where civil defense is virtually non-existent, zero. In USSR, every student, whatever his major subject, has to go through very extensive 4-year military and civil defense training. You can see me here with a group of students during one of the war games near Moscow. The main idea, of course, is to prepare a huge reserve army of the USSR. Each student has to graduate as a junior lieutenant. In my case, it was administrative and military intelligence service. My first assignment was to India as a translator with the Soviet Economical Aid Group, building refinery complexes in Bihar state and Gujarat state. At that time, I was still naively, idealistically believing that what I was doing contributes to the understanding and cooperation between the nations. It took me quite a number of years to realize that what we were bringing to India was a new type of colonialism, 1,000 times more oppressive and exploitative than any colonialism or imperialism in history of mankind. But at that time, I was still hoping that, well, maybe it's not that bad, could be worse, and things may go for better. And I even tried to implement the beautiful Marxist motto, proletarians of all the countries unite. I tried to unite with a nice Indian girl, and I was fascinated by Indian culture, by the family life in this country. But obviously, Communist Party had different plans for my genes, so I had to marry this beautiful Russian girl. In the span of my career, I married 3 times. Most of these marriages were marriages of convenience, on advice from the Department of Personnel. This is normal practice in USSR. When a Soviet citizen is assigned to a foreign job, he has to be married, either to keep family in USSR as hostages, or, if it's a convenience marriage like mine, so that the husband and wife are virtually informers on each other to prevent defection or contamination by decadent imperialist or capitalist ideas. In my case, I hated that girl so much that the moment I landed in Moscow, we were divorced, and I married later, second time. By the end of my first assignment in India, I was promoted to the position of public relation officer. You can see me here translating a speech by a Soviet boss.
And you're on the right.
I'm on the right here, yes. And it was, the occasion was commissioning of the refinery complex in Bihar, Barauni. Back in Moscow, I was immediately recruited by Novosti Press Agency, which is a propaganda and ideological subversion front for the KGB. 75% of the members of the Novosti are commissioned officers of the KGB. The other 25 are, like myself, co-opted agents who are assigned to specific operations. In this particular case, you can see me talking to students of Lumumba Friendship University in Moscow. This is a huge school under the direct control of the KGB and Central Committee, where future leaders of the so-called national liberation movements are being educated and selected carefully. And some of them have absolutely, this, for example, is a group of students from Lumumba. They don't look like students at all. They look more like military, and that's exactly what they were. They were dispatched back to their countries to be leaders of the so-called national liberation movements, or to be translated into normal human language, leaders of international terrorist groups. Another area of activity when I was working for the Novosti was to accompany groups of so-called progressive intellectuals, writers, journalists, publishers, teachers, professors of colleges.
Hopefully that term progressive, as in progressivism, is reminding you of, you know, what's a huge popular thing right now. It's all over leftist politics, and it's taking over. And now here we are having a warning from a communist defector about everything that's happened in the past and is happening to us now. And of course they're going to have progressive people come and learn from them.
You can see me here in Kremlin. I'm second on the left, with a group of Pakistani and Indian intellectuals. Most of them pretended they don't understand that we are actually working on behalf of the Soviet government and the KGB. They pretended that they are actually being guests, VIP intellectuals, that they are treated according to their merits and their intellectual abilities. For us, they were just a bunch of political prostitutes to be taken advantage for various propaganda operations. Therefore, you can see perfectly well the senior colleague of mine on the left doesn't really have that much respect on his face, and myself with a very skeptical smile, typical KGB sarcastic smile, anticipating another victim of ideological brainwashing. This is how a typical conference in Novosti headquarters in Moscow looked like. Sitting in the middle is Boris Burkov, the then director of Novosti press agency, high-ranking party bureaucrat in the Department of Propaganda. I am standing next to a famous Indian poet, Sumitranandan Pant. He was famous because he was an author. He was the author of a famous poem titled Rhapsody to Lenin. That's why he was invited to USSR, and everything was paid by the Soviet government. Pay special attention to number of bottles on the table. This is one of the ways to kill the awareness or curiosity of foreign journalists. One of my functions was to keep foreign guests permanently intoxicated the moment they land at Moscow airport. I had to take them to the VIP lounge and toast to friendship and understanding between the nations of the world. Glass of vodka, then a second glass of vodka. And in no time, my guests would be feeling very happy. They would see everything in kind of pink, nice color. And that's the way I had to keep them permanently for the next 15 or 20 days. At certain point in time, I had to withdraw alcohol from them so that some of them who are the most recruitable would feel a little bit shaky, guilty, trying to remember what they were talking last night. That's the time to approach them with all kind of nonsense, such as joint communique or statement for Soviet propaganda. That's the time they are the most flexible. And of course, what they didn't understand, they didn't realize or pretended not to realize, that myself, who was drinking together with them, was not drinking at all. I had ways to get rid of alcohol through various techniques, including special pills which were given to me by my colleagues. But they were taking it seriously. In other words, they would consume quite a large volumes of alcohol and feel quite uneasy next morning. In 1967, the KGB attached me to this magazine, Look magazine. A group of 12 people arrived to USSR from United States to cover the 50th anniversary of October Socialist Revolution in my country. From the first page to the last page, it was a package of lies, propaganda cliché, which were presented to American readers as opinions and deductions of American journalists. Nothing could be far from truth. These were not opinions. They were not opinions at all. They were the clichés which the Soviet propaganda wants American public to think that they think. If it does make any sense at all. It sure does, because from the viewpoint of the Soviet propaganda, although there are some subtle criticisms of the Soviet system, the basic message is that Russia today is a nice, functioning, efficient system supported.
If an honest democratic election were held in the Soviet Union today involving legitimate alternatives, sufficient time and opportunity for their exposure, and the assurance that those elected would serve, the Communist Party would win. This is not speculation. It is a conclusion based on the-spot observation and interviews by 10 look editors and photographers whose journeys through the Soviet Union for this issue totaled more than a year. Propaganda.
By majority of population. That's the biggest lie. And of course, American intellectuals and journalists from Look magazine elaborated on that untruth in various different ways. They intellectualized that lie. They found all kinds of justifications for telling lies to American public.
Excuse me, it was partly your job to make sure that they got these ideas,
yes,
and accepted them as their own ideas.
Right. Actually, even before they arrived to USSR, and they paid astronomical sum of money for that visit, they were submitted, this Novosti Press Agency developed so-called backgrounders, 20-25 pages of information and opinions which were presented to the journalists even before they bought their tickets to Moscow. They had to analyze the situation, and judging on their reaction to that backgrounder, the local Novosti representative or local Soviet diplomat in Washington, D.C. would assess whether they be given visa to USSR or not.
Oh, so they were selected ahead of time.
Oh yes, they were pre-selected very carefully, and there is not much chance for honest journalists to arrive to USSR and to stay there for 1 year and to bring this package of lies back home. This, for example, is a centerfold of the Look magazine. They presented this monument erected by Communist Party in Stalingrad as the symbol, personification of Russian military might. And they said in the article, which is published on the site, that Soviets are very proud of the victory in the Second World War. This is another big myth, a lie. No sensible people would be proud to lose 20 millions of their countrymen in a war which was started by Genosse Hitler and Comrade Stalin and paid by American multinationals. Most of the Soviet citizens look at this type of monuments with disgust and sorrow, because every family lost father, brother, sister, or child in the Second World War. Yet American journalists who were trying to appease, to please their hosts, presented this picture on the centerfold as the symbol and personification of Soviet national, they call it Russian national spirit.
Wow.
And it was greatest misconception and a very tragic misunderstanding. Of course, Look magazine was not distributed in USSR. The main audience was in United States. But I presume that many Americans, millions of Americans who were reading Look magazine at that time, had absolutely wrong idea about the sentiments of my nation, about what the Soviets are proud of and what they hate. This is a group, you see the same lady with the sword in Stalingrad. This is the group of journalists. Myself is in the center with the same devilish smile. And Mr. Philip Harrington is on the extreme left there with his camera. This is the gentleman which was so deaf or so uninterested in what I had to say to him. This is the same picture, a blow-up of the same picture. Many guests from various countries, in this particular case from Asia and Africa, were taken by me as a Novosti Press Agency employee for a tour across Siberia, for example. We would show them typical kindergarten, you see, nothing special by American standards, just nice children sitting, eating their breakfast or lunch. What they could not understand, or they pretended not to understand, that this is an exemplary kindergarten. This is not the kindergarten for average person or average family in USSR. And we maintain that illusion in their minds. You can see myself under the red spot in the middle there, with the same business-like expression. I'm doing my job. That's what I'm assigned to do, and that's what I was paid to do. But deep inside, I still hope that at least some of these useful idiots would understand that what they are looking at has nothing to do with the level of affluence in my nation. This is a better picture which reflects the true spirit of the Soviet childhood. This picture was printed in a Canadian government publication by mistake. In the middle, you can see children playing on a small courtyard, and the caption goes, "This is a typical kindergarten in Siberia." What these idiots didn't understand, that it is not kindergarten at all. It is a prison for children of political prisoners.
Wow.
But there was not a single mentioning that what they were visiting actually was an area of concentration camps. And the job of people like myself to help them to not to notice that they are actually talking to prisoners. Most of the children were dressed, especially on the occasion of the foreigners' visit. Of course, there were no corpses on the ground. There were no machine gun guards. And well, it looks not very pleasant, as you see. It looks dull, but obviously it does not create an impression that this is actually a prison.
Well, did any of the journalists have the curiosity to ask about prisons and that kind of thing?
Yes.
They were in Siberia. This
Yes.
is what you associate.
Yes, some of them asked questions, and naturally we would give them, for the stupid question, we give them stupid answer. No, there are no prisons in Siberia. No, most of the people who you see are free citizens of USSR. They are very happy to be here, and they are contributing to the glory of the socialist system. Some of them pretended that they believe what I was telling them, and most of them, we may discuss it later, what are the motivations of these people? Why would they stubbornly bring lies to their own population through their own mass media? I have various answers to this. There is not a single explanation. It's a complex of explanations. It's fear, pure biological fear. They understand that they are on the territory of an enemy state, a police state. And just to save their rotten skins and their miserable jobs, their affluence back home, they would prefer to tell a lie than to ask truthful questions and report truthful information.
Wow.
Second, most of these schmucks were afraid to lose their jobs, because obviously if you tell truth about my country, you will not last long as a correspondent of New York Times or Los Angeles Times. They will fire you. What kind of correspondent are you? You obviously cannot find common language with Russians if they kick you out in 24 hours. So just by trying to be conformist to their own editorial bosses, they tried not to offend the sentiments of the Soviet administrators and people like myself. Deep inside, I hope they would insult my or offend my sentiments. Obviously, they preferred not to. Another reason, I refuse to believe it, but obviously there is another reason. Obviously, it's a greed. These people earn a lot of money. When they come back to USA, they claim that they are experts in my country. They write books which sells in million copies, titled like Russians, The Truth About Russia. Most of it is lie about Russia. Yet they claim to be Sovietologists. They play back myth about my country, the propaganda cliches. Yet they stubbornly resist the word of truth. If a person like Solzhenitsyn is either defecting or kicked out of USSR, they try all their best to discredit him and to discourage him. I don't have much chance to appear on national network with a true story about my country. But a useful idiot like Hendrik Smith or Robert Kaiser, they are big heroes. They come back from USSR, they say, oh, we were talking to dissidents in Russia. Big deal. Soviet dissidents are chasing American correspondents in the streets, and they are cowardly escaping from these contacts. For some strange reason, if you want to know more about Spain, you refer to Spanish writers. If you want to learn more about French, you read French writers. Even about Antarctica, I bet you would read Penguins. Only about the Soviet Union, for some strange reason, you read Hendricks and Schmendricks and all kind of Kissingers, because they claim that they know more about my country. They know nothing, or next to nothing, or they pretend that they know more than they actually do. I would say they are dishonest people who lack integrity and common sense and intellectual honesty.
Oh yeah.
They bring back all kind of stories like that. A kindergarten in Siberia. Omitting the most important fact, it's a prison for children of political prisoners. Another greatest example of monumental idiocy of American politicians. Edward Kennedy was in Moscow, and he thought that he is a popular, charismatic American politician who is easygoing, who can smile, dance at the wedding in Russian palace of marriages. What he did not understand, or maybe he pretended not to understand, that actually he was being taken for a ride. This is a staged wedding, especially to impress foreign media or useful idiots like Ed Kennedy. Most of the guests there, they had security clearance, and they were instructed what to say to foreigners. This is exactly what I was doing. You can see me in the same damn wedding palace in Moscow where Ed Kennedy was dancing here. You see, smiling. He thinks he's very smart. From the viewpoint of Russian citizens who observe this idiocy, he's narrow-minded, egocentrical idiot who tries to earn his own popularity through participation in propaganda farces like this. Here you can see myself. On the right, again, exemplary Soviet bride. On the left, 3 journalists from various countries, Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Obviously, they enjoying the situation. They will go back home and write the reports. We were present on a regular Soviet wedding. They were not present on a regular Soviet wedding. They were present, they were part of a farce, of a circus performance. Another thing which I had to sometimes risking my life to explain to foreigners. Time magazine, for example, is very critical of South African racist regime. The whole article was dedicated to the shameful internal passport system where blacks are not allowing to live with whites. For some strange reason, for the last 14 years since my defection, nobody wanted to pay attention to my passport. This is my passport. It also shows my nationality, and it has a police rubber stamp, which is called propiska in Russian language, which assigns me to a certain area of residence. I cannot leave that area, same way as this black man cannot leave the area in South Africa. Yet we call South African government racist regime. Not a single Jane Schmonda or Fonda is brave enough, courageous enough to come to media and say, look, this is what happens in USSR. I sent a copy of my passport to many American liberals and civil rights defenders and all the other useful idiots. They never bothered to answer me back. This shows what kind of integrity, what kind of honesty these people are. They're a bunch of hypocrites because they don't want to recognize a good example of racism in my country. This is the first stage of befriending a professor. You can see myself on the left with the same James Bond smile. On the right is my KGB supervisor, Comrade Leonid Mitrokhin, and in the middle a professor of political science in Delhi University. The next stage would be to invite him to a gathering of Indo-Soviet Friendship Society. There he is sitting next to his wife before he is being sent to USSR for free trip. Everything is paid by the Soviet government. He was made to believe that he is invited to USSR because he is a talented, sober-thinking intellectual. Absolutely false. He is invited because he is a useful idiot, because he would agree and subscribe to most of the Soviet propaganda cliché. And when he is coming back to his own country, he is going for years and years to teach the beauties of Soviet socialism to newer and newer generations of his students, thus promoting the Soviet propaganda line. The KGB was even curious about this gentleman. It may look innocent. Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, a great spiritual leader, or maybe a great charlatan and crook, depending on from which side you are looking at him. Beatles were trained at his ashram in Hardwar in India how to meditate. Mia Farrow and other useful idiots from Hollywood visited his school, and they returned back to United States absolutely zonked out of their minds with marijuana, hashish, and crazy ideas of meditation. To meditate, in other words, to isolate oneself from the current social and political issues of your own country, to get into your own bubble, to forget about troubles of the world. Obviously, KGB was very fascinated with such a beautiful school, such a brainwashing center for stupid Americans. I was dispatched by the KGB to check what kind of VIP Americans attend this school.
That's you on the left.
Yes, I'm on the left. I was trying to get enrolled in that school. Unfortunately, the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi asked too much. He wanted $500 American for enrollment. But my function was not actually to get enrolled in the school. My function was to discover what kind of people from United States attend this school. And we discovered that, yes, there are some influential members of family, public opinion makers of United States, who come back with the crazy stories about Indian philosophy. Indians themselves look upon them as idiots, useful idiots. To say nothing about KGB, who looked at them as extremely naive, misguided people. Obviously, a VIP, say a wife of a congressman, or a prominent Hollywood personality, after being trained in that school, is much more instrumental in the hands of manipulators of public opinion and KGB than a normal person who understands, who looks through this type of fake religious training.
Why would they be more susceptible to manipulation?
I just mentioned that because, you see, a person who is too much involved in introspective meditation. You see, if you carefully look what Maharishi Mahesh Yogi is teaching to Americans, is that most of the problems, most of the burning issues of today can be solved simply by meditating. Don't rock the boat. Don't get involved. Just sit down, look at your navel and meditate. And the things, due to some strange logic, due to cosmic vibration, will settle down by themselves. This is exactly what the KGB and Marxist-Leninist propaganda wants from Americans, to distort their opinion, attention, and mental energy from real issues of United States into a non-issues, into a non-world, non-existent harmony. Obviously, it's more beneficial for the Soviet aggressors to have a bunch of duped Americans than Americans who are self-conscious, healthy, physically fit, and alert to the reality. Maharishi Mahesh Yogi obviously is not on the payroll of the KGB. But whether he knows it or not, he contributes greatly to demoralization of American society. And he's not the only one. There are hundreds of those gurus who come to your country to capitalize on naivete and stupidity of Americans. It's a fashion. It's a fashion to meditate. It's a fashion not to be involved. So obviously, you can see that if KGB were that curious, if they paid my trip to Hardwar, if they assigned me to that strange job, obviously they were very much fascinated. They were convinced that that type of brainwashing is very efficient and instrumental in demoralization of the United States.
Our conversation with Yuri Alexandrovich Bezmenov, who is a defector from the Soviet Union, a former propaganda agent for Novosti and the KGB, will continue after this message.
Isn't that crazy? Like, and we have swallowed Eastern philosophy, hook, line, and sinker. Look at all the yoga, look at all the meditation we do here now. They wanted this. They wanted this.
This picture shows the part of the building of USSR embassy, and my supervisors. On the left is Comrade Mehdi, an Indian communist, and on the right, Comrade Mitrokhin, my supervisors in the secret department of research and counter-propaganda. It has nothing to do with either research or counter-propaganda. Most of the activity of that department was to compile huge volume of information on individuals who were instrumental in creating public opinion.
I agree, Lil Rip. That's why I'm showing this, man. That's why I'm streaming it all over my personal Facebook and to like 6 different streaming platforms, because like we are being taken over by Marxist radicals and our nations are going to implode. This is, oh my gosh. Anyways, let's continue.
Publishers, editors, journalists, actors, educationalists, professors of political science, members of parliament, representatives of business circles. Most of these people were divided roughly in two groups. Those who would toe the Soviet foreign policy, they would be promoted to the positions of power through media and public opinion manipulation. Those who refused the Soviet influence in their own country would be character assassinated or executed physically come revolution. Same way as in the small town of Hue in South Vietnam, several thousands of Vietnamese were executed in one night when the city was captured by Viet Cong for only 2 days. And American CIA could never figure out how could possibly communists know each individual, where he lives, where to get him, and would be arrested in one night, basically in some 4 hours before dawn, put on a van, taken out of the city limits and shot. The answer is very simple. Long before communists occupied the city, there was extensive network of informers, local Vietnamese citizens, who knew absolutely everything about people who are instrumental in public opinion, including barbers and taxi drivers. Everyone who was sympathetic to the United States was executed. Same thing was done under the guidance of the Soviet embassy in Hanoi, and same thing I was doing in New Delhi. To my horror, I discovered that in the files where people were doomed to execution, there were names of pro-Soviet journalists with whom I was personally friendly.
Pro-Soviet?
Yes. They were idealistically minded leftists who made several visits to USSR, and yet the KGB decided that come revolution or drastic changes in political structure of India, they will have to go.
Why is that?
Because they know too much. Simply because, you see, the useful idiots, the leftists who are idealistically believing in the beauty of Soviet socialist or communist or whatever system, when they get disillusioned, they become the worst enemies. That's why my KGB instructors specifically made a point, never bother with leftists. Forget about these political prostitutes. Aim higher. This was my instruction. Try to get into large circulation, established conservative media. Rich, filthy rich movie makers, intellectuals, so-called academic circles. Cynical, egocentric people who can look into your eyes with angelic expression and tell you a lie. These are the most recruitable people, people who lack moral principles, who are either too greedy or too suffer from self-importance. They feel that they matter a lot. These are the people who KGB wanted very much to recruit.
But to eliminate the others, to execute the others, don't they serve some purpose? Wouldn't they be the ones they rely on?
They serve purpose only at the stage of destabilization of a nation. For example, your leftists in United States, all these professors and all these beautiful civil rights defenders, they are instrumental in the process of the subversion only to destabilize a nation. When their job is completed, they are not needed anymore. They know too much. Some of them, when they get disillusioned, when they see that Marxist-Leninists come to power, obviously they get offended. They think that they will come to power. That will never happen, of course. They will be lined up against the wall and shot. But they may turn into the most bitter enemies of Marxist-Leninists when they come to power. And that's what happened in Nicaragua. You remember most of these former Marxist-Leninists were either put to prison or one of them split, and now he's working against Sandinistas. It happened in Grenada when Maurice Bishop was already a Marxist. He was executed by a new Marxist who was more Marxist than this Marxist. Same happened in Afghanistan when first there was Taraki, he was killed by Amin, then Amin was killed by Babrak Karmal with the help of KGB. Same happened in Bangladesh when Mujibur Rahman, very pro-Soviet leftist, was assassinated by his own Marxist-Leninist military comrades. It's the same pattern everywhere. The moment they serve their purpose, all the useful idiots are either be executed entirely, all the idealistically minded Marxists, or exiled or put in prisons, like in Cuba. Many former Marxists are in Cuba, in prison. So most of the Indians who were cooperating with the Soviets, especially with our Department of Information of the USSR embassy, were listed for execution. And when I discovered that fact, of course I was sick. I was mentally and physically sick. I thought that I'm going to explode one day during the briefing at the ambassador's office. I would stand up and say something that we are basically a bunch of murderers. That's what we are. It has nothing to do with friendship and understanding between the nation and blah, blah, blah. We are murderers. We behave as a bunch of thugs in a country which is hospitable to us, a country which with ancient traditions. But I did not defect. I tried to get the message across. To my horror, nobody wanted even to listen, least of all to believe what I had to say. And I tried all kinds of tricks. I would leak information through letters or lost documents or something like that, and still I got no message. The message was not published, even in the conservative mass media of India. The immediate impulse to defect was Bangladesh crisis, which was described by American correspondents as Islamic grassroots revolution, which is absolute baloney. There was nothing to do with Islam, and there was no grassroots revolution. Actually, there are no grassroots revolutions, period. Any revolution is a byproduct of a highly organized group of conscientious and professional organizers, but has nothing to do with grassroots. In Bangladesh, it was nothing with grassroots. Most of the Awami League party members, Awami League means People's Party, were trained in Moscow in the High Party School. Most of the Mukti Fauj leaders, Mukti Fauj in Bengali means People's Army, same as SWAPO and all kind of liberation armies all over the world, the same bunch of useful idiots. They were trained at Lumumba University and various centers of the KGB in Simferopol, in Crimea, and in Tashkent. So when I saw that Indian territory is being used as a jumping board to destroy East Pakistan, I saw myself thousands of so-called students traveling through India to East Pakistan, through the territory of India, and Indian government pretended not to see what's going on. They knew perfectly well, the Indian police knew it, the intelligence department of Indian government knew it, the KGB of course knew it, and the CIA knew it. That was most infuriating, because when I defected and I explained to the CIA debriefers they should watch out because East Pakistan is going to erupt any moment, they said I was reading too many James Bond novels. Anyway, so East Pakistan was doomed. One of my colleagues in the Soviet consulate in Calcutta, when he was dead drunk, he ventured into the basement to relieve himself, and he found big boxes which said printed matter to Dhaka University. Dhaka is the capital of East Pakistan. And since he was drunk and curious, he opened one of the boxes and he discovered not printed matter. He discovered Kalashnikov guns and ammunition in there. Anyway, it's a long story. When I saw the preparations for the invasion into East Pakistan, obviously I wanted to defect immediately. The only thing I couldn't at that time make up my mind when and where and how. One of the reasons, of course, you see, I was in love with India. I mentioned that before. I spoke the languages. I socialized with people. And I understood that I had to act fast unless I want this beautiful country to be permanently and irreparably damaged by our presence. One of the reasons not to defect was, as you can see, I was living in relative affluence. Who the hell in the normal mind would defect and do what? To be abused by your media, to be called McCarthyist and fascist and paranoid, or to drive a taxi in New York City? What for? What the hell for should I defect? To be abused by Americans, to be insulted in exchange for my effort to bring the truthful information about impending danger of subversion. As you can see, I was living in quite a comfortable conditions next to swimming pool, where Indians were not allowed, by the way. I was highly paid expert in propaganda. I had my family. I was respected by my nation. My career was cloudless. The third reason, how to defect with the family. To defect with the baby and the wife would be virtual suicide, because according to law, that hypocritical law which I quoted before, the Indian police will have to hand me over back to the KGB, and that will be the end of my defection and probably my life. Again, I cannot smuggle my wife because she was not quite sure what I was doing. She was not that idealistically involved, and she was definitely not in the total picture of what I was doing for the KGB. She would be shocked if I you know, put her in my van and drive her to the American embassy or elsewhere. That would be a greatest danger. So again, I had to defect in such a way that my defection would look as simple disappearance. And there were many cases like that when the Soviet agents simply disappeared, either killed in action or, thanks to their curiosity and their close contacts with radicals, some of them were killed by the Marxists, by the way. It happened in many African countries when the Soviet KGB were killed by Africans themselves. Not because they hated Marxism-Leninism, but because they were simply trigger-happy bunch of unruly characters. If you give them a machine gun, they will shoot. And some of the Soviets obviously were not careful enough to protect themselves, and they got into embarrassing situations when they were shot at the crossfire between factions of so-called liberation movements. Anyway, so I decided, as I said, to study the counterculture. I decided this probably would be the best way to disappear. I socialized with characters like this. On the left, you see, he's a barefoot American hippie. It took me quite a
Quick Lizard, how's it going? I'm glad you're laughing. What are you laughing about?
long time to study exactly what they were doing and how to mix with them. But eventually I did it. Most of Indian newspapers carried my picture and promise of 2,000 rupees for information about my whereabouts. But they were looking for the wrong person, because they obviously tried to stop a young Soviet diplomat in white shirt and tie, and this is how I looked at the time of defection. Nobody could possibly think that a Soviet diplomat would be as crazy as to join a bunch of hippies.
That's you.
Yes, travel India and smoke
it's
hash.
no
So
laughing.
I made
It's
it
no laughing matter.
literally, almost like a Hollywood-style detective story. From under the nose of the KGB in Bombay airport, I landed the plane and I flew to Greece, where I was debriefed by the CIA. That's basically that's all for my slides.
We can turn off the projector, and that's very interesting. Well, you spoke several times before about ideological subversion. That is a phrase that I'm afraid some Americans don't fully understand. When the Soviets used the phrase ideological subversion, what do they mean by it?
Ideological subversion is the process which is legitimate, overt, and open. You can see it with your own eyes. All you have to do, all American mass media has to do, is to unplug their bananas from their ears, open up their eyes, and they can see it. There is no mystery. There is nothing to do with espionage. I know that espionage intelligence gathering looks more romantic. It sells more deodorants through the advertising, probably. That's why your Hollywood producers are so crazy about James Bond type of thrillers. But in reality, the main emphasis of the KGB is not in the area of intelligence at all. According to my opinion and opinion of many defectors of my caliber, only about 15% of time, money, and manpower is spent on espionage as such. The other 85% is a slow process which we call either ideological subversion or active measures, активные мероприятия in the language of the KGB, or psychological warfare. What it basically means is to change the perception of reality of every American to such an extent that despite of the abundance of information, no one is able to come to sensible conclusions in the interests of defending themselves, their families, their community, and their country. It's a great brainwashing process which goes very slow, and it's divided in 4 basic stages. The first one being demoralization. It takes from 15 to 20 years to demoralize a nation. Why that many years? Because this is the minimum number of years which requires to educate one generation of students in the country of your enemy, exposed to the ideology of the enemy. In other words, Marxism-Leninism ideology is being pumped into the soft heads of at least 3 generations of American students without being challenged or counterbalanced by the basic values of Americanism, American patriotism. The result you can see. Most of the people who graduated in the 60s, dropouts or half-baked intellectuals, are now occupying the positions of power in the government, civil service, business, mass media, educational system. You are stuck with them. You cannot get rid of them. They are contaminated. They are programmed to think and react to certain stimuli in a certain pattern. You cannot change their mind, even if you expose them to authentic information, even if you prove that white is white and black is black. You still cannot change the basic perception and the logic of behavior.
Guys, this is coming right from the horse's mouth. This is a dude who defected out of the Soviet Union because it was a murderous, awful regime. Okay? He's warning us 50 years ago about what was happening in our nations then, and now we're seeing the fruit of it. Like, we're near the end.
In other words, these people, the process of demoralization is complete and irreversible. To get rid of society of these people, you need another 20 or 15 years to educate a new generation of patriotically minded and common sense people.
It's too late.
Acting
Tell your friends.
In favor and in the interests of the United States society.
Of your own nation.
People who have been programmed and, as you say, in place, and who are favorable to an opening with the Soviet concept. These are the very people who would be marked for extermination in this country?
Most of them, yes. Simply because the psychological shock when they will see in future what the beautiful society of equality and social justice means in practice, obviously they will revolt. They will be very unhappy, frustrated people. And the Marxist-Leninist regime does not tolerate these people. Obviously they will join the links of dissenters, dissidents. Unlike in present United States, there will be no place for dissent in future Marxist-Leninist America. Here you can get popular like Daniel Ellsberg and filthy rich like Jane Fonda for being dissident, for criticizing your Pentagon. In future, these people will be simply squashed like cockroaches. Nobody is going to pay them nothing for their beautiful, noble ideas of equality. This they don't understand, and it will be the greatest shock for them, of course. The demoralization process in the United States is basically completed already. For the last 25 years. Actually, it's overfulfilled, because demoralization now reaches such areas where previously not even Comrade Andropov and all his experts would even dream of such a tremendous success. Most of it is done by Americans to Americans, thanks to lack of moral standards. As I mentioned before, exposure to true information does not matter anymore. A person who was demoralized is unable to assess true information. The facts tell nothing to him. Even if I shower him with information, with authentic proof, with documents, with pictures, even if I take him by force to the Soviet Union and show him concentration camp, he will refuse to believe it until he is going to receive a kick in his fat bottom. When a military boot crashes his, then he will understand, but not before that. That's the tragic of the situation of demoralization. So basically America is stuck with demoralization, and unless, even if you start right now, here, this minute, you start educating new generation of Americans,
50 years ago.
It will still take you 15 to 20 years to turn the tide of ideological perception of reality back to normalcy and patriotism. The next stage is destabilization. This time, subverter does not care about your ideas and the patterns of your consumption. Whether you eat junk food and get fat and flabby, it doesn't matter anymore. This time, and it takes only from 2 to 5 years to destabilize a nation, what matters is essentials: economy, foreign relations, defense systems. And you can see it quite clearly that in some areas, in such sensitive areas as defense and economy, the influence of Marxist-Leninist ideas in the United States is absolutely fantastic. I could never believe it 14 years ago when I landed in this part of the world, that the process will go that fast. The next stage, of course, is crisis. It may take only up to 6 weeks to bring a country to the verge of crisis. You can see it in Central America now.
COVID-19!
And after crisis, with a violent change of power, structure, and economy,
peaceful
you have
protests.
so-called the period of normalization. It may last indefinitely. Normalization is a cynical expression borrowed from Soviet propaganda. When the Soviet tanks moved into Czechoslovakia in '68, Comrade Brezhnev said, "Now the situation in brotherly Czechoslovakia is normalized." This is what will happen in the United States if you allow all these schmucks to bring the country to crisis, to promise people all kind of goodies and the paradise on earth, to destabilize your economy, to eliminate the principle of free market competition, and to put a big brother government in Washington, D.C., with benevolent dictators like Walter Mondale, who will promise lots of things, never mind whether the promises are fulfillable or not. He will go to Moscow to kiss the bottoms of new generation of Soviet assassins, never mind. He will create false illusions that the situation is under control. Situation is not under control. Situation is disgustingly out of control. Most of the American politicians, media, and educational system trains another generation of people who think they are living at a peacetime. False. United States is in the state of war, undeclared total war against the basic principles and the foundations of this system. And the initiator of this war is not Comrade Andropov, of course. It's the system. However ridiculous it may sound, the world communist system or the world communist conspiracy, whether I scare some people or not, I don't give a hoot. If you are not scared by now, nothing can scare you. But you don't have to be paranoid about it. What actually happens now, that unlike myself, you have literally several years to live on unless the United States wake up. The time bomb is ticking. With every second, the disaster is coming closer and closer. Unlike myself, you will have nowhere to defect to, unless you want to live in Antarctica with penguins. This is the last country of freedom and possibility.
Okay, so what do we do? What is your recommendation?
Just remember, friends, this guy had already been in Canada. That's where he first defected to try and conceal his new identity as good as he could. And then he goes to the United States. So he's been everywhere. He's seen it all. When he says the United States is the freest place left almost 50 years ago, what does that tell you about Canada then? What does it tell you about Canada now?
To the American people.
Well, the immediate thing that comes to my mind is, of course, there must be a very strong national effort to educate people in the spirit of real patriotism, number one. Number two, to explain them the real danger of socialist, communist, whatever, welfare state, big brother government. If people will fail to grasp the impending danger of that development, nothing ever can help United States. You may kiss goodbye to your freedom, including freedoms to homosexuals, to prison inmate. All this freedom will vanish, evaporate in 5 seconds, including your precious lives. The second thing, the moment at least part of United States population is convinced that the danger is real, they have to force their government. And I'm not talking about sending letters, signing petitions, and all this beautiful, noble activity. I'm talking about forcing United States government to stop aiding communism. Because there is no other problem more burning and urgent than to stop the Soviet military-industrial complex from destroying whatever is left of the free world. And it is very easy to do. No credits, no technology, no money, no political or diplomatic recognition, and of course no such idiocy as grain deals to USSR. The Soviet people, 270 millions of Soviets, will be eternally thankful to you if you stop aiding a bunch of murderers who sit now in Kremlin and whom President Reagan respectfully calls government. They do not govern anything, least of all such complexity as the Soviet economy. So basic Two very simple, maybe two simplistic answers or solutions, but nevertheless, they are the only solutions. Educate yourself, understand what's going on around you. You are not living at the time of peace. You are in a state of war, and you have precious little time to save yourself. You don't have much time, especially if you are talking about young generation. There's not much time left for convulsions to the beautiful disco music. Very soon it will go, just overnight. If we are talking about capitalists or wealthy businessmen, I think they are selling the rope on which they will hang very soon. If they don't stop, if they cannot curb their unsettled desire for profit, and if they keep on trading with the monster of the Soviet communism, they are going to hang very soon. And they will pray to be killed, but unfortunately they will be sent to Alaska probably to manage industry of slaves. It's simplistic. I know it sounds unpleasant. I know Americans don't like to listen to things which are unpleasant.
Yeah.
But I have defected not to tell you the stories about such idiocy as microfilm, James Bond type espionage. This is garbage. You don't need any espionage anymore. I have come to talk about survival. It's a question of survival of this system. You may ask me, what is it in for me? Survival, obviously, because unlike, as I said, I am now in your boat. If we sing together, we'll sing beautifully together. There is no other place on this planet to defect to.
I think that's the end. I think this is just the beautiful music. Wow, what do you think of that, friends? Like, that was crazy. I know some people viewing this might be thinking, oh, well, you know, the Soviet Union collapsed, so all's good and well. I mean, that guy obviously, he was wrong. No, friends, we've been given a lot of grace. We've been given a lot of time to make things right again, but we haven't. We've chosen to continue on in this path. Now, there's been short periods of respite here and there where we were on a downward trajectory and then something would happen, certain people become presidents, events in the world would occur a certain way, and we'd kind of just level off for a little while. And then we'd start going down again, and we are rapidly descending. So I'm just going to show you one more thing real quick here. Who's behind this all if the Soviet Union has collapsed? Rockefeller gave money to Trotsky. Who financed the Bolshevik Revolution? Okay, so you had the Tsars in Russia, a monarchy or whatever, over the Russians, and people said this was wrong, we've got a revolt. Who paid for it? And so notice, friends, like, I already knew about this before, so it was just easy to type into Google. Rockefeller gave $16 million to Trotsky. Maybe I'm wrong on how much it was. Thanks for sharing. Yeah, you're welcome, Little Rip. It's my pleasure. Friends, you heard the message. You see where we're going. We got to be sharing this information in love, in graciousness, in kindness. We got to be like, hey, friend, look, okay? Because unfortunately, understandably, you go up to someone, you scream in their face, they're not going to listen to you. They just become defensive right away. But it's hard not to, because this is such urgent information, you know, like, yeah. What is this? Icy buckets. We are talking about the impending collapse of society and the world as we know it. You can go watch my whole Down the Rabbit series. All my VODs are there, and they're also on my YouTube channel. Anyways, so Rockefeller gave $60 million to Trotsky, and, you know, it's true. It's true. Okay. Yeah. So the top communist leaders have never been as hostile. I don't know. I've never read this before. The small PP, big brain. Oh, this isn't PewDiePie's channel, dude. Sorry. I don't know. This is Big PP though. It's amazing. This is information you need to know. Anyways, Trotsky was January of 1916. Trotsky was expelled from France, came to the United States. It's been claimed that his expenses were paid by Jacob Schiff. Circumstantial evidence points to a wealthy donor in New York. Overthrow of the Tsarist regiment, the regime. John was quoted by columnist Cali Knickerbocker as saying that his grandfather had given about $20 million for the triumph of communism in Russia. Where do the Rockefellers come in? When we discover David Rockefeller holding a confidential meeting with Mikhail Gorbachev in the absence of government sponsorship. Okay, so this is like, friends, the wall's coming down. Oh, good! Thank goodness, Ronald Reagan, you convinced Mikhail Gorbachev to do that. Well, we're going to learn some crazy stuff about Mikhail Gorbachev later in the series. John D. Rockefeller, J.P. Morgan, John D. Ryan of National City Bank, like some of the most wealthy, powerful people, with President Teddy Roosevelt, leader of the Progressive Party. Oh, there's that word again, friends. Anyways, so yeah, that's where the money came from. And so they funded the communist revolution, understanding we can use this for ourselves to take over the world. And let me see here. You seem smart. Are you a teacher? No, dude. I'm just a guy who's decided to stop spending my life partying and drinking and doing drugs, and thanks to the grace of God, and read and research things. And so, I mean, you can't help but learn once you invest time doing that. Okay, what do I want to see here? Oh, geez, what was it? Yeah, speaking of drugs, marijuana is bad for your short-term memory, friends. Just so you know, it's not this magical medicine thing that you smoke. Well, maybe it'll come back to me. Okay, so just like, yeah, feel free to 1 year sober here. Good for you, little Rip. Good for you, man. It can be hard, but may you be blessed as you continue on. Okay, so after I watch these things, I like to kind of go through and just like add commentary. And feel free to add comments as well. So he's the son of an officer. This Yuri Bezmenov was the son of an officer, friends. That's why he was able to get anywhere in life. You have to be connected in a socialist communist system, okay? If you're just you know how they're all about like the workers unite and everything? If you're just a worker, you're a piece of crap to them. They don't care about you. You're just someone that they use in order to help build cars or get the grain. And in a time where we're like now more and more automated, what are they going to have you doing? We're going to learn about the Georgia Guidestones in this series, friends. The Georgia Guidestones say that the Earth would be best off if there were only 500 million people alive on it. What are they going to do with the other 7 billion people if they have automated everything? Thanks, man. I feel great mentally and physically. Totally, dude. Like, I never really smoked a lot of marijuana. I did it maybe 20 times during my 20s, because most of my 20s was spent working with heavy equipment where any incident you got drug tested. So I just was like, I'm not going to risk my job. But yeah, I felt sluggish. I felt like my memory wasn't as good afterwards. And I was in the military before, so like I wanted to be at the top of my game, but peer pressure, man. I thought it was cool, so I still did it sometimes. We learned about disinformation before. All right, he was talking about disinformation. We've talked about that already. Life has no value in the communist system. And we're seeing that here, like friends. look how little life is valued here. They say life is precious, but like we're killing our babies in the womb. You know, less than 3% of abortions in Canada are due to medical emergency or to rape. They're mostly just voluntary. Just someone's like, I'm not ready. I don't want to have a baby. I got to finish college, or I don't want to stop partying. You know, and that's sad. That's a human life. It's not a clump of cells. That's why when people have a miscarriage, they are devastated. Doesn't matter if it's only at 3 months. They're devastated because it's not a clump of cells. Same with our old people. And we just saw this with COVID-19. We'll talk about this in a future episode. COVID-19, they had no problem putting infected people in senior citizen homes, hoping that they would kill off old people. And we got euthanasia, assisted suicide, legal in Canada. I don't believe in Canada doctors are allowed to ignore their patient's request for assisted suicide. I think it's against the law. I'm not sure though. I know it was talked about 5 years ago. They rounded up all the smart people. So friends, this isn't just some guy making up stuff so that he can sell books and get airtime in the United States. In fact, remember he said national television wouldn't touch him with a 10-foot pole? No one wanted to hear his story. That's why he was talking to G. Edward Griffin, like a conspiracy theorist of the 70s. No one cared. Yo, what's up, King's Mind? So when I was touring around Eastern Europe, I rented a BMW Dakar motorcycle, a 600cc. It was pretty cool. And I just toured around Eastern Europe partying because that's all my life was about back when I was 28. And I stopped in Bulgaria and I was at a hostel there. And the guy leading the hostel, he took us around on a tour, blah, 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 blah. I talked a little bit about the former Soviet Union. And I said, hey, man, I don't mean any offense, but I noticed like your roads and everything are all in disrepair. Like they're not in good condition. What's going on? He said, honestly, man, the Soviet Union, when the communists took over, they killed all of our brightest people, all of our greatest leaders and intellectuals. And so we haven't really known how to retrain ourselves. And so since the fall of the Soviet Union, here we are just trying to figure out how to take care of infrastructure again. And so like everywhere you go, there's like grass and weeds growing through the sidewalks and the highways weren't very good. And that's the reality. That's the reality. They kill off the brightest people because they don't want anyone detracting from their statement. Little off topic, but are you? That's hilarious, Killfeed. If you keep that up, dude, you know what? I'm just gonna mute you. But hang out, keep listening. But you've lost your privilege to chat. Man, how stupid. Anyways, so yeah, I learned that firsthand from a Bulgarian, okay, living in Bulgaria post fall of the Soviet Union. Funny how we're told all the time about the evils of colonialism, right? Okay, he said from his experience, and this is a guy living in India, I believe it was after the British gave freedom back to India. He said the communist regime was way more oppressive than colonialism ever was. But we're taught the opposite. Oh, the frig, man. Woo. So, see, friends, when we're trying to talk about something super serious, about like the fate of humanity, of mankind, we got trolls coming in to the chat. They can't even help themselves. And they are the very people that he said cannot see the truth, no matter how bad. Like, they shouldn't be joking in the chat. They should be like, holy crap, man, I'm sharing this with all of my friends. But instead, they're like talking about circumcision. How stupid is that? But I mean, this is why we're going down the toilet, because our younger generations have been indoctrinated and brainwashed to not be able to understand the truth or share the truth. Holy smokes. Another one, just like nonstop, man. It's called a sunspot, by the way. It's like freckles. Unless you're talking about like my eyebrows. Oh my gosh. Crazy. So yeah, the average citizen in the communist system didn't even like communism. What'd you think of that? That was a truth bomb. You could be executed for defecting. Like crazy, you know? I can understand execution for treason, right? For going against the system. Now, mind you, going against a horrible system is called, righteous indignation, I suppose. No one knows what you're saying there, dude. Thanks, man. I feel great mentally and physically. Oh, that's an old chat comment. Okay, we already talked about this, but just again, reiterating, friends, guns saved Yuri Bezmenov from KGB freaking assassins. They thought, you know what? Let's not go after him. He's got guns. One of us will probably end up dying, and that'll get all over the news. We have to peaceably be talking about keeping our guns, and we'll be talking about that next time. Pierre Trudeau was soft on socialism, he said. No kidding. Pierre Trudeau was a big communist, and so is his son. And so no wonder we're seeing what's going on. They loved Cuba. CBC, where he worked, sold him out. Surprise, surprise. The CBC sold out a guy for divulging truths about the ills of the Soviet Union and sharing those over international radio broadband. He wasn't allowed to tell the truth on the news. Oh, the Soviet Party was all about, remember his marriage, right? His arranged marriage, because the Soviet Union wanted their perfect, Soviet race or whatever. These people are always about eugenics. And you're going to see that again and again. We already talked about Jeffrey Epstein and Peter Nygard. Both of these elitists, they both wanted to have their own massive collection of offspring with their genetics. We're going to learn later on that very powerful people involved in wanting to cure COVID-19 and save us, their families are all about eugenics. Eugenics is what the Nazis thought was cool, to get rid of Jews and have a perfect Aryan race. The National Liberation Movement, those dudes from India or Bangladesh or whatever that were being trained, it was crazy. They weren't students. They were being trained to become military officers to lead coups and take over nations. The alcohol on the table. It was, they're constantly feeding them booze to make their minds not work. So their minds would be susceptible to all the garbage that they were saying and not be able to, to kill their awareness and their curiosity about what was really going on there in Russia. And meanwhile, here in COVID-19, remember, essential services, liquor stores and marijuana dispensaries. Why were those essential services? Friends, they wanted people who were feeling anxious about the situation to not think about it, but to just get drunk every night after work or while they're home because they don't have work and get high. They wanted us not being able to think critically about what was going on. And I thought critically, and I saw what was going on the whole time. At first, I was like, yeah, okay, this is serious. Let's be careful. And I was advocating a 12-day or 2-week-long shutdown. I just said, let's just shut the nation down. Get everyone to go get food from the grocery stores. 2 weeks. Let's lock her down so that the 11-day incubation period of the virus would just die off. Nope, we didn't do that. We kept stuff just open enough to keep, quote unquote, getting people sick. While we crushed our economy. People lost jobs forever, killed themselves, beat their wives, molested their kids. Oh yeah. Yeah, you look into that. Like the social ramifications of, everything have been so bad. It's been worse than the disease itself. But we'll talk about that later on in this series. Okay, so Aldous Huxley wrote a book called Brave New World, and it's presented like this warning about what could happen in the world in a dystopian future. And in it, they use drugs to pacify the people. Okay. And the reality of is that Aldous Huxley and his brother loved drugs. They loved doing them with all their friends. Okay. So it wasn't actually a warning, friends. They, one of them, I forget which brother, was the first director of UNESCO for the United Nations when it was founded. United Nations Education, Sciences, and Culture Organization, I think is what it stands for. Basically going around from nation to nation, shaping the minds of children and people everywhere so that they can go along with the United Nations agenda. And we're going to be talking about that too, friends. Next issue, Agenda 2030, UN Agenda 2030, from their own website. Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. But his book, Brave New World, was not a warning. It was like a prophecy. It was a sneak peek of what they were hoping to install. And so look at us now, friends. They legalized marijuana. They don't want people to be able to think clearly. You know, we had someone in here tonight commenting that, yeah, he's glad he hasn't smoked in a year, smoked marijuana in a year, because it's so bad for your mind. And it breaks my heart all the time when former guys that I served in the military with say that it's the only thing curing them from PTSD. No way, man. No way. I've been through stressful things. I got friends that are also in the military and firefighters, and they deal with PTSD and the gruesome things that they see, and they deal with it a whole lot differently, and they're fine. So I know that doesn't have to be the cure. It's a lie. Russia was only permitting foreign journalists who would agree and then further the agenda abroad. Think about that. They didn't let anyone critical in. Okay, so they brought in people that were going to agree, sent them back. And then those people just disseminated this false information about how great socialism was. I think it's awesome, guys. So far, I haven't looked at the stats, but we've had hundreds and hundreds of people stop by and vote. We've had an average of 7 people viewing the whole entire time. So this is awesome. People are hearing this. Everyone's just got to be sharing. I know it sucks watching something that's like 3 hours long when it's not like a blockbuster movie, but once a week, it's like, okay, I'll invest that time. It's so worth it. And then this has to be shared, you know. People have to know this. We are going, let's just go back and look here real quick. Here we are again. The 45 Goals to Destroy the United States of America, written back in 1958 by Cleon Skousen, former FBI agent. You know, we went through this earlier tonight in the broadcast, friends. We've pretty much done all of them. Like, we are on the other end. Hi, and welcome to... Sorry about that. That's from my website. Typical in Siberia. Oh, typical prison for children in Siberia. That CBC photo, they thought, oh, it's a typical kindergarten. You know, it was so drab, that kindergarten they had there. And it reminded me of this. Maybe you've seen this picture. It is so sad. It's pathetic. Okay, can we blow it up? Okay, these are French preschoolers, I guess. Oh, cool. Here it is. Come on, Twitter. I want to see there it is. These are French preschoolers social distancing because of COVID-19. Look at this poor kid. Is he drawing or is he crying? Like, what the frig is going on, man? Hashtag no new normal. This is insanity. This is insanity. Of course, it's probably not like this anymore. Thank you, Lord. But this is what that Russian daycare prison thing reminded me of. Just awful. Okay, we looked up how funding for the revolution came from Rockefeller. Oh, big question, friends. Why would the New York Times want their journalists not to divulge the truth about the Soviet Union? Why would the New York Times, an American paper, not want the truth to come out? He said it himself. Why was Yuri, a defector from the Soviet Union, not having his door pounded down to get on MSNBC or NBC at the time, ABC, CBS, all the big primetime news channels? Why didn't they want the truth from him? It should be obvious to you, friend. It should be obvious to us. They are a part of the agenda. They don't want the truth to come out. Why don't they talk to the dissidents? The people that, why weren't the journalists over there? He said they didn't stop and talk to people that were against the Soviet Union, Remember they mentioned Kissinger? I think it's Henry Kissinger. Big advocate for the socialist system. He's still involved in politics. Maybe you've seen this dude before. Images. Here he is. Here's when he was younger. Here's how most of us have probably seen him growing up in the 90s and 2000s. Yes, this is today in defense of Henry Kissinger. He's indefensible. My goodness, wake up. Wake up. An American politician, diplomat, and geopolitical consultant, aka a world politics terraformer. Times was criticizing South Africa for its racism, okay, but not willing to criticize Soviet Union for also locking people down regionally with specific passports inside their own country. Okay, they said it was wrong in South Africa, but not wrong in Soviet Union. They never even mentioned it. Don't be deceived. It's not just because it's a white-black issue. It's because they did not want people to know how crazy it was under the socialist system, because they wanted it as appealing as possible for all of our university professors and our high school teachers and everyone to think it was so amazing, so they would teach all of us that it was going to be so amazing too. Surprised they didn't kill Yuri. No, he had shotguns, dude. And he could drive fast, he said. Like, seriously, friends, I'm a vet. I own firearms. I'm well trained with them. And I'm even taking more training in the upcoming months. Get on her, man. It's fun. It's fun to shoot. Next episode's going to be about guns. And next episode is going to be about guns, and we're going to watch some stuff like where it's fun, and women are getting into sport shooting and everything. It's awesome, and it's not only is it something we should have to enjoy, but it's something we need to keep tyrants off of our backs. So get out there before it's too late. Go get your possession acquisition license, get your restricted possessions acquisition license, get yourself a handgun, get yourself a non-restricted semi-automatic rifle. You're limited to 5 rounds in a magazine. That's not a lot of bullets, but you can always, when poop hits the fan, friends, you can take those pins out of those magazines. Right now that's legal, but when there's no law, society has collapsed, and the people over you are tyrants. Laws don't really matter anymore. Defense of yourself, defense of your loved ones, defense of your neighbor, defense of strangers in need because they're being victimized. That's what's going to be important. So yeah, get that stuff, get the training. Follow John Lovell, Warrior Poet Society on YouTube. He's awesome. Okay. Yeah, it was just such a gross double standard that they would criticize South Africa, but not the Soviet Union. The yogi there who became so popular with the Beatles and Russia. Did you notice that? The KGB approved of meditation and drug use, and they saw it as a great way to make the mind pliable and malleable for brainwashing. And we wonder what the heck happened during the drug revolution of the 60s and where we are today. It is crazy. I watched Ferris Bueller's Day Off the other night because I hadn't seen it in forever. It was in the $5 bin at Walmart. So I just bought it. I was like, yeah, whatever. It's such a piece of crap. It's all about trying to tell the youth of America that life is funner if you're a big piece of crap who doesn't follow the rules and constantly breaks the rules, and don't worry, you'll get away with it and it'll be fun and cool. And my gosh, like what cultural brainwashing that movie was. And John Hughes was ingenious because the parade scene, he has clips and like close-ups of every kind of American you can have. So when Americans saw that movie, they saw themselves in that movie, and then they thought, and this is still true today, Ferris Bueller's Day Off was my movie. It was America's movie, you know, and it's still critically acclaimed, even though anyone with a critically thinking brain can see it was a propaganda piece. Doesn't matter if John Hughes didn't realize what he was presenting. Hello, what movie are we talking about? Pinto the Tsar. Oh, well, we were actually talking about how your ancestors, the Russian Tsars, were taken over by in the Bolshevik Revolution. Yeah, so notice Eastern philosophy was useful. Friends, look at us now. We are inundated with Eastern philosophy, pantheism, relativism. You know, there's no absolute truth anymore. It's crazy. It's so sad. But the KGB wanted this all over. And again, it does not matter that the Soviet Union fell. I don't know if Putin exactly is still above all this. He was former KGB. But the powerful people in charge who got the whole ball rolling on all of this, friends, they wanted it this way. And we're going to learn later on in the series a little bit more about Karl Marx's origin. Was he just a guy that thought politically, or was there something more going on? Can't take over this, Tsar. Okay, that's right, man. Notice the character assassination of detractors. So anyone who disagreed, Yuri said they would work to defame them and assassinate their character so that no one would listen to them anymore. They would seem illegitimate. What do we see now? You know, you go out on Facebook and you question something, and you got a whole bunch of people coming out saying you're a racist, saying you're a white supremacist, saying you know, just, it's just ridiculous without actually bringing up any sort of argument, you know, that makes any sense. No, it's just ad hominem attacks. We're seeing this all the time, mostly against conservatives. Honestly, I rarely see, I mean, on Facebook, yeah, it's a bit different. I see people on the right just being idiots, name calling back against the left, and vice versa. But when you look at like spokespeople, most of them aren't out there just name calling. I watched this debate between T.I. and Candace Owens, and a bunch of other people in the panel, but he had very little to say that was intelligent and just kept trying to shut her down in the most juvenile ways, while she really restrained herself in not coming back at him, but just presenting facts to the listening audience, most of whom weren't even willing to listen. They were all like, boo, boo, every time she opened her mouth. And it was just so sad. So sad. Okay, notice, friends, he talked about how they had established a network of information, so they knew the political bent of every single person. So in one night, when they gave the go order, they went out and rounded up every detractor and then took them outside of the city and killed them or sent them off to be locked away. That should freak the crap out of you, because right now, we're all on Facebook, we're all on Google, we're all on all this stuff. We've got Alexa in our house, we've got OK Google in our house, and I don't, but it doesn't matter anyways. These devices are constantly listening to you. That's why when you go to a website with ad space, the ad is probably something you've talked about recently or looked up recently, okay? Because it all goes into a database so that they can try and make better ad revenue off of you, because the things you're interested in, you'll click on and you'll be able to go buy. At the same time, they see what you search, they see what you watch, they see what you post on Facebook, they see everything you type, and AI, artificial intelligence, yo, thanks, Lil Rip, awesome, dude. You'll see the playlist there of Down the Rabbit Hole, And yeah, man, like hopefully, it helps you see more, but it sounds like you already are real awake, but it's hopefully a good resource for you to give to your friends. You remove your battery when you're traveling anywhere now because this, COVID-19 tracking stuff. Yeah, honestly, man, I think it's kind of like there's not much we can do about it. No matter what, they're going to track us no matter what. Czar, dude, I'm your average guy. I just have read a lot. I've listened a lot. That's all, man. And anyone can know this stuff. But, and you just connect the dots, honestly, pray for wisdom. Pray for wisdom. You'll probably be given it. I didn't know anything like 10 years ago. It was bad. When I was 29, man, I believed all this stuff. I would have been like the guys jumping on the chat, like just trying to like get jokes. But yeah, so Facebook, AI, all of this stuff, they know who you are, okay? So if you are a fundamentalist, right-wing, conservative, freedom-loving, patriot, Christian, you're probably going to get rounded up first. Sorry to tell you, that's the truth. And you can decide to just get off social media, but one way or another, they're going to get you. It's just so sad. Oh yeah. Okay. So then Yuri again said one of the KJB's goals, get into the conservative groups to usurp them, get into the media, get into Hollywood. We've seen all this. It's obvious. They went after the leftists and the civil rights advocates. They would be used. And friend, if you're on the left thinking, well, I don't have to worry about this, I agree with all this. He said that those people were often done away with once the useful idiots had been had been used to their fullest. What's the word? Well, just until they're done with them. So he says you can see the subversion, and friends, you can literally see the war that's going on, the battle of the minds, if you're willing to look for it. Unfortunately, a lot of people can't see it. That's why I'm doing this series. I want people to wake up. Only 15% of the battle is espionage, he said. Ideological subversion, psychological warfare, changing perceptions of reality. That was 85%. So no one can know the truth. Brainwashing. 85% of the battle was those very subtle ways that they've done for decades. That's why we're where we are, man. It's crazy. Number one, here's the steps. Demoralization. We talked about that already. Demoralization. Alfred Kinsey was instrumental. 15 to 20 years, because all you have to do is educate one generation of students. They've done it. And then those people grew up and became teachers and taught the next generation. We're in like 4-5 generations into this now. 2, destabilization, 2 to 5 years. Economy, what's gone on with COVID-19, friends? It is bad. Foreign relations and defense. Weaken your defenses. Obama was all about weakening the defense of the United States. Thankfully, it's a lot stronger now, but oh my gosh, defund police. There's some important people no longer able to, help protect. Oppressed victim NPC. I'm a victim of oppression and I'm offended and oppressed. I tried virtue signaling all day on Twitter, but everyone who disagrees with me is a white supremacist and a Nazi. How do I explain to people why communism is good? Oh, man. I don't know. There's a lot of people that would agree with you. You can go back in your echo chamber, I guess. But no, in all seriousness, I know you're joking. There's no way you think that. But get this information out. People need to know the danger. I see you have read the 24 protocols. Probably. Try canceling them. Not sure what you mean. Czar's responding to oppressed victim. Try cancel culturing those that disagree with you on Twitter. Twitter is such a cesspool. It's so hard to even get an idea across there. So, yeah, we're in the destabilization. We've got the crisis. That's step 3, friends. Crisis after crisis after crisis. It's nonstop. The news is constantly telling you there's something to be afraid of and to give up more freedoms to survive. 4, normalization. And this is all being normalized, okay? This is all being normalized. And we even talked about pedophilia, pederasty being normalized in the last episode. It's sick. It's sick. Stop aiding communism, he says. No kidding. But we voted in. We voted in. Oh, but we want to help people. We want to help the lower class, the people who are, all right, well, instead of voting someone in to take more tax dollars, why don't you join a local charity organization and volunteer and go help those people? And vote in libertarian parties that will take care of the things that matter, like police, military, your roads, infrastructure, and you do the social services. That's the way it was supposed to work. It was not supposed to be about government being our savior, but that's how they've tricked everyone. All right. Oh, yeah, it's funny. The same people raging against the machine are going to be executed. The same people right now you see burning everything down, tearing down every statue because the American history is so disgusting and so vile. We've got to destroy this nation and rebuild it in our own image. Those same loud, unruly people, they'll be sent off to the camps because you can't have those kinds of people, because once they realize they've been duped, then they rage against the new system. But Uri says, oh, we won't have that. Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion. If you need to read it, if you haven't, they call it a fake blood, but it has stood the test of fake book. It stood the test of time. Plus, a lot of things that are true are called conspiracy. One of the protocols says they're going to turn the races against each other, and it makes sense with George Soros being a Zionist, funding Black Lives Matter, and putting out anti-white hate propaganda. Whoa, dude, you are totally jumping ahead. We'll be talking about George Soros, BLM, Antifa, and everything in a couple of episodes while we talk about the lies of the media. Vote Patrick Little in 2020. I'm Canadian, but I don't know who that is. Anyways, guys, that is everything pretty much for this evening. We went pretty long, but still, share with your friends. I'm going to be sharing this again on Facebook. I always put out a Facebook story saying, go catch up. And I'm going to end the way I always do, because friends, we are in dire straits right now, and there is only one hope. And I'm going to ask him for help. Heavenly Father, I thank you so much for your goodness and your grace. I thank you, God, that although we have totally ruined the world that you wanted to be perfect and wonderful for us, you graciously have made a way for us to know you. And it's through your Son, Jesus Christ, who is the image of the invisible God. And he came and he lived a perfect, righteous life, loving everyone, teaching righteousness, and being just, and teaching about grace and healing, and showing us the perfect representation of what we should be like as we submit to him as our Lord and Savior and accept what he's done to pay the penalty for our sins and die on the cross, the death that we deserve because we're not righteous, we're not holy, we're not perfect. And he rose again to prove he'd conquered death and the penalty of sin, so that we could believe in him, follow him, submit to him as Lord, and live for him. And God, we are in such a bad situation, as you know. You've seen it all. Lord, you've allowed people to become very blind spiritually and politically, ideologically, philosophically. Heavenly Father, I thank you for those who've watched tonight. I pray you will open their eyes, first off, to their need for you, a good, loving God who's also holy and cannot be with sin or sinful people, but has made a way that we can be forgiven by the blood of Jesus. I pray that they would understand your holiness, but also your great unconditional love, and seek you and find you right now. And I pray that this would go out, Lord, that people would see the truth, that you would open the eyes to the blindness of what's going on around us. Oh God, we are so close. And I thank you, Lord, that no matter how bad it gets, just like for the persecuted church in China, in Pakistan, Iran, in former Soviet Union, Bulgaria, Romania, all these places where communism crushed the church or tried to, you kept it strong, you took care of your people, and you've made a way that in our mortal death, we have eternal life in heaven, and you're coming back soon, and the birth pains are all around us according to Matthew chapter 24 and the book of Revelation. Everything is going according to your plan. You're allowing all of this corruption to happen. We do ask for you to give us respite and for things to get better, but if it's time, it's time. We thank you for your wisdom over that, and we just we look forward to your return, your reign, as you set up a perfect, righteous kingdom on earth that you're going to rule over for all of those who have beforehand recognized that you are the rightful King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And I pray that you'll help people to do that, because you are so good. And I thank you for changing my life 9 years ago. I thank you, God, for graciously helping one of our viewers tonight get away from drug use. And I pray that that clarity will help him to know you. And I give you praise. This is all for your glory. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, God bless everybody. Have a good night. Peace.